This is Audible.
SIMPOC, Human Remnants. Written by Ray J. Perreault. Narrated by Zachary Johnson. Introduction. I love action science fiction, and I also love sci-fi that makes the reader think a little. I love action, but I want a story that could be happening somewhere. The SIMPOC series comes from a question that I have. When I read some sci-fi and the hero does battle with an evil computer, I wonder, where did that computer come from? What is its backstory? That's what this series is about. It starts with two very intelligent computers, and over time one turns evil. In order for these computers to be created, then go wild, they had to exist among others. So it was interesting to create them in context with our future. Then I had to come up with a way to eliminate the humans. Simple, viruses always do the job. So along comes a supervirus with suspicious origins, and the rest of the story emerges. I hope you enjoy this series, and please check out my other books and use the contact information to let me know how I'm doing. I love the feedback, good or bad. In Book 1, the super-thinking computer SIMPOC came alive and suddenly found himself alone in the world. His programmer and 99.9997% of the human population were wiped out by a super-fast virus. While he was figuring out how to keep thinking, he was able to connect with humans on the space station Oasis, the Moon Colony Desert Beach, and the Mars Colony Red Dirt. Commander Joan Hurl and her husband, Colonel Tom Hurl, are forced to abandon the space station Oasis when their resources run out. When they land with the rest of the station crew, they are attacked by the other computer that has been programmed with other instructions. Book 2 picks up after they disconnected the other computer and realized that one of Oasis' crew had stolen the programming and biomaterial from the laboratory. What is he going to do with the knowledge and material that he stole? He has the skills to make a better computer. Is that what he is planning to do? The crew from the Moon Colony Desert Beach is also forced to abandon their colony and return to Earth in lifeboats. They join their fellow astronauts and prepare for the future. Eventually, the astronauts are able to communicate with the remaining U.S. leadership who have taken refuge on an aircraft carrier in the Atlantic. Finally, it seems the few remaining humans might be able to continue life on Earth. Later in the story, the few remaining humans and the two computers discover another potential threat. A threat that might explain everything and force the humans to fight for their survival and the computers to take steps so they can continue thinking. Date: 2051.6066. The large Chinook passed by, making the typical wop, wop, wop sound. Julia smiled and thought how surprised they'd be when they looked for the computer. He had arrived just as they were invading the facility earlier. When they left, he went to work, claiming his materials and destroying what was left. True, he destroyed the EDU organic processor, but he walked away with the programming, the biomaterials, and, most important of all, the research. With his skills and this wealth of materials, he knew he would be able to create a bigger, faster, smarter computer. Dr. Julius M. Harold stayed on Interstate 25, driving as fast and swerving as much as he felt like. The road was pretty empty considering what happened. In a way, he felt exalted, a young boy getting the one present that he wanted all of his life. To an outside observer, they would have seen the smile from ear to ear. He was the leader now. He had all of the tools he needed in the back of this truck, and now the world was going to be his, to control, to dominate, to revel in. When he approached Route 24, Julius slowed and put on his blinker. Then he laughed out loud and turned it off. He saw the irony. He exited for Route 24, descending down the ramp and turning left on West Cimarron Street. He drove his truck through the deserted streets and saw cars were still parked neatly along the road, and there was the occasional vehicle parked at irregular angles. It's funny, he thought. So many people died, and they did it neatly. They went home and died in their beds. Sad, but at least the streets aren't blocked. Dr. Harold was on a mission that he was destined for. Whether the stars became aligned or his number just came up, regardless of the cute phrase used, this was his time. Time for his destiny to be fulfilled. Careers were interesting. A person would work for years or even decades trying to be in the right place at the right time, hoping to have an impact. Most did nothing, some died early, and some had false pride, thinking that they had accomplished something meaningful. Often the changes they made were changed back or eliminated soon after their departure. But in rare situations, a person made a real impact and changed the course of humanity. Julius smiled as he realized that mankind was dead. True, there wasn't much of mankind left to change the course of, but hey, you take what you can get. Julius headed for the one place where his destiny could be fulfilled. His company had hidden underground research facilities that few employees were aware of. It wasn't his facility, but he knew of its capabilities. In the ups and downs of office politics, at times he was on top and his research was relevant. And other times, someone else was getting all of the funding and recognition. That lab was a result of those other times. Henry Abramson had gotten everything he wanted. Julius had fought hard for the resources. After all, his kingdom was similar to Henry's, but he was following a slightly different biology for cell generation. Henry's percolation tanks were using different amino acids and viruses, which he was using to build an organic processor. In a way, Julius felt like an architect. By taking a tank where 100% of the molecules were man-made, and by applying different chemical baths, he could cause the molecules to align themselves. Then the magic occurred. By adding the correct mix of amino acids and viruses to the top of the tank, they would percolate through the homogeneous mixture, combining as they descended, assembling like building blocks. Each amino acid added would continue building the blocks until eventually the final perfect cell was created. Then the proper viruses would alter the cell, changing its DNA and making it into a thinking cell of sorts. Henry's concepts for advanced computer processor architectures, organicware, was the most recent hot topic on the board's agenda. He could make small, simple cells, and he got the $1 billion to build a massive facility. He was the organicware guy who developed the pet project of the board of directors. He got results, so he got everything he wanted. Historically, the guys that built the computer were the hardware guys, those who wrote the programs were the software guys, and, Julius smiled. He loved his term for his work, juicyware. Once again, Julius smiled and thought, at least now the software guys blaming the hardware guys and vice versa doesn't work. It's all in the organic processor. Julius was their favorite at one time, but his perfect cells were too involved to create. And Henry's were not. Henry's were simple compared to what Julius was working towards. But his chemical process was working and Julius's wasn't. Once Julius found out what steps Henry's process followed, Julius immediately saw the hole. A hole that Henry wasn't aware of, and one that Julius could fill. Combining their knowledge would have produced a masterpiece, and likely a Nobel Prize. But sharing was not part of Julius's plan. He knew that if he waited, he would find an opportunity to combine processes and succeed. Now his time had arrived. Recent programming and inanimate processors had reached their limitations. New code or algorithms could go only so far without a truly unique processor to handle the massive amounts of data needed to conceptualize 3 dimensions and process subjective thought. The old silicon, then chemical processors were good at what they did, but they couldn't handle the new demands. That's why companies began developing organic processors capable of deep learning. At first, they were small and inefficient. Then as the biology improved, they grew in size and computing power. The first structures were somewhat random, and the synapse patterns were disorganized. But as the cell size became uniform, then the synaptic paths could be programmed. At that point, the capabilities leaped beyond those of physical units, but the next step was on the horizon. Merely programming the units wasn't enough. Now the new frontier was organic computers that could program themselves. This was the learning computer, and to date only a couple had been created. Julius knew that SIMPOC was one of those. Julius wanted to take that concept further. SIMPOC was limited because of its cell size, which slowed the computational speed, and it still had a relatively large energy requirement. Julius could use the discoveries of Henry Abramson combined with his to create a cell that was half the size, and with the same computational power. This denser brain matter with lower power requirements made a transportable unit almost possible. The tables had turned. He had all of the research and technology based on SIMPOC, so by combining it with his and Henry's, Julius was positive that he could build an organic processor that would astound the world. At least what was left of it. Dr. Perreault was a little disappointed that he couldn't get SIMPOC, but the EDU was close enough. All this activity made that time Dr. Julius Perreault's time. He had the expertise, and he had the materials, and research material to develop an organic processor with a denser cell structure, and to really leave his mark on the world. Once again he smiled and thought, too bad there are very few people left. Commanding a few is better than commanding none. Finn, mobile, calm, SIMPOC. I am concerned about our ability to continue thinking. Now that Dr. Perreault has stolen my specifications and programming, it worries me. Please research Dr. Julius Perreault and tell me what you find. We must do what is necessary to protect us and the few remaining humans. Date 2051.6074. Admiral Hagus Hagerly stood on the deck of CVN-87, the United States Combined Forces aircraft carrier Pittsburgh. The sky was blue, the wind was 15 to 18 knots on the bow. He could barely feel the sway of the deck underneath him. After all, 110,000 long tons didn't move much when hitting waves. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but on this ship it was commanded by Captain Harry Thomas, who was the Carrier Battle Group Commander, or CVBG, and responsible for the carrier group. Admiral Hagerly was a guest, so it was appropriate for him to welcome another guest, the President of the United States. The President of the United States, Arnold Patterson, was en route as part of a 5-plane formation, all of which contained the leadership of the United States, including key military personnel and influential members of his cabinet and the U.S. Congress. The President's plane was on short final and would land first. When multiple planes were inbound, the highest priority plane would land first. Then, in decreasing order of priority, the remaining planes would land. When there was only one deck to land on, the higher priority planes landed first, and in case of a malfunction, the trailing planes had to be considered expendable. The President's airplane hit the deck and engaged the arresting cables, and it came to a rapid stop. The Admiral watched as the deck crew disengaged the cable and the airplane was moved to the side elevator. As soon as it cleared the deck and the elevator started down, the other planes were cleared to land. The Admiral walked through a deck hatch to meet the President on the hangar deck. Going from an immense deck to a narrow ladder always caused a strange feeling for the Admiral. He wouldn't admit it as claustrophobia, but just being sensitive. Unfortunately, it would often be swaying and pitching with the waves. As the Admiral passed through the hatch and descended the ladder, the walkie-talkie in his aide's hand came to life. It was a call from the CAG to the Admiral. "Sir, it's for you," the aide said as he handed the unit to the Admiral. "Sir, I just wanted to inform you that AF-2021, which is on short final, had a problem. The AC told us that one of the passengers suddenly became ill. We have no way to know if the virus has infected the airplane. I have no choice but to order the CAT officer to drop the cable. I've directed the air boss to direct the aircraft commander to low-go and return to base." The Admiral stopped for a moment and responded. "Do you know who became ill?" "Yes, sir. It was Marcia Field, the VP's Chief of Staff." "Harry, you did the right thing. I'll tell the President." They both knew the meaning of being directed to return to base. Dropping the cable prevented the airplane from landing, and they also knew they didn't have enough fuel to RTB. That was likely a death sentence for everyone on board. This decision was necessary, and it fit in with their op plan. These were unusual times, and they had to protect the lives of the President and everyone on board. They had been at sea when the virus struck, and the crew was clean, and it had to stay that way. Letting anyone on board with any chance of infection was too much risk to take. They had to take the prudent steps. The Admiral met the President at his airplane ramp and saluted him. They knew each other well, and after the return salute they embraced. "Hagus, how are you doing?" "Okay, Mr. President." "I'm sorry about your family." At their mention, the President's face went white, and the Admiral thought he might pass out. "I don't know what I'll do without her and the kids. They got caught in all this on that damn PR trip to Europe. It hit so fast and no one knew what to do, and it was all over. My God, I miss them," the President said to his old friend. "I know, sir. I can't believe it happened. It caught us all by surprise. We were lucky that you were at Camp David and could be isolated so quickly. The last of your cabinet and leaders of the House are landing and will be on board shortly. But we had a problem with one of the airplanes. En route, the VP's Chief of Staff became ill. We had to assume the worst and deny them landing. They have been waved off, and they are proceeding to their home base." That was the VP and his family. Oh my God. There wasn't anything that could be done? "I'm sorry, sir, but we know nothing about this virus, and it has a 100% lethality rate. We couldn't jeopardize you or the other members of your cabinet and Congress." We also have almost 3,500 people on this carrier. I understand. Can they make it back to the land? The Commander-in-Chief asked with a beaten voice. Admiral Hagerly just moved his head from side to side. No words were necessary. Let me escort you to your quarters, and in 2 hours we'll brief you on fleet status. Okay. Date: 2051.6075. Joan, Tom, and Alpha didn't know what Dr. Perreault was up to, but there were other pressing matters that needed their attention. Tom looked at Alpha and said, "Can you ask SIMPOC what information he has from the Space Consortium facility? We've got to find a way to get some recovery lifeboats refurbished and launched to Oasis so the Desert Beach and Red Dirt people have some options." Acknowledged. SIMPOC, Alpha, what current information do you have from the Space Consortium regarding lifeboats? Tom and Joan want to get some launched to Oasis as their top priority. Alpha, SIMPOC, the Oasis cruise lifeboat has been transported to the refurbishment facility. Besides that one, there appear to be 2 others awaiting service, and 2 in the assembly area. Mobile, SIMPOC, please advise all mobile units at the Space Consortium to continue servicing the lifeboats. Acknowledged. Tom, Joan, your vehicle has been moved to the refurbishment facility, and there are 2 others awaiting servicing, with the remaining 2 in assembly. I have arranged for your other crew members to be housed in the local BOQ, and the officer club has been made available to them. The electrical power has remained on, and the food refrigeration units should still be in operation. Thanks, Alpha, Tom said, and as he talked he glanced in Joan's direction and saw that she looked terrible. Honey, are you okay? As soon as he said it, he knew she wasn't. We're the only humans left on Earth. My mother, my father, my sister, what happened to them? Tom put his arms around his wife and she sobbed uncontrollably. As he offered her a tissue, he said, "You're right. I can't do much about my brother. Maybe I can find a way to travel to LA soon, but not now. Let's go to the comm center and update Desert Beach and Red Dirt, then we'll check on your family." Tom and Joan knew the location of the comm center because they had been there hundreds of times, participating in launches or supporting activities in space. There was no hesitation when they got to the punch lock on the door. Tom entered the code and they walked in. They were immediately accosted by the odor. Alpha followed them in. His smell sensation was objective and he didn't react. He merely measured it. Odors weren't bad or good, just relative counts of particulate matter. Tom and Joan walked slowly into the room and saw 4 dead technicians. Talk about dedication, Tom thought. Joan and Tom knew a couple of them, and after seeing so much death on Oasis, they could only pause and pay their respects. These guys must have stayed here trying to support us in space right to the last minute. The end must have come quickly because they didn't get off any last transmissions, Joan said. Alpha, help me get these guys into the observation room in the back. I wish we could do something for them, Joan said. I suggest that once we have things under control, we follow the appropriate rites with these humans, and accept that as a service for all the humans we have encountered, Alpha suggested. Joan and Tom nodded. That's the least we can do for them, Tom said. The comm panels were all hot and just waiting to be initiated. Desert Beach, this is SC, Joan said to the comm computer. Roger, SC. Desert Beach. What's happening? It's a long story. We had some difficulties when we landed. Apparently, SIMPOC isn't the only thinking computer. There is another one that has other priorities, and it attacked us with mobile units when we landed. After a pretty heated battle, we flew to where the other computer was and disconnected it. I hope that puts the issue behind us for a while, although one of the Oasis staff, Dr. Perreault, has gone off the deep end. He may have stolen that computer's programming and tech data. Joan, I only worked with that guy a couple of times and he gave me the creeps. Nothing about him surprises me, Desert Beach said. The problem might surface again. We don't know what he is doing. Unfortunately, about the virus, our worst fears have come true. There has been massive death. We haven't found anyone alive yet, although there may be some in isolated areas, Joan transmitted. You're kidding me. The entire planet is dead. We don't know if it hit everyone, but so far we found no one. What's happening with you? We're holding on and we were waiting to hear from you. As far as I've heard from Red Dirt, they're okay too. Desert Beach, before we left Oasis, you said you were going to follow us down with one of your lifeboats? Roger. We have one ready for launch. If the disease has burned itself out, then I guess we'll start coming home. We've been here almost 30 hours, so I guess it's burned out. We never made it to the decontamination facility for the protective suits. We were a little busy being attacked. We could use your help down here, and it's getting lonely. We'll continue prepping to launch the first lifeboat, and then launch the others in 1 to 2 hour intervals. So I guess we're coming home. What's this about thinking computers? There is the computer SIMPOC, which you and I have been talking with. Apparently he is a pretty sophisticated thinking computer, and he put an organic processor in an advanced mobile unit. The mobile unit was instrumental in defending us after we landed. Aside from SIMPOC, there is another thinking computer which is controlling a bunch of mobile units. We're not sure why, but it went rogue and is attacking everyone with its units, Joan explained. Great. What the hell are we getting into? Between you and me, it sounds like we're stuck in a bad sci-fi movie. I think stuck is the operative word. Let us know when you launch. Will do. Red Dirt, SC Command. We're here and it is under control for a moment. You've heard the discussion between us and Desert Beach. Desert Beach is beginning the evacuation and we're servicing our lifeboat, and there are 2 others that we should be able to launch. If we can time things, we should be able to get the first 32 of you guys down and then send 2 other lifeboats up for the remainder. We should be able to send up some supplies, so if some of you are stuck on Oasis for a while, we'll make sure they have some good stuff to eat. Please let us know what your status is and we'll stay in touch. SC Command out. After the transmission, Joan just sat for a moment and sighed as the enormity of everything set in. Tom turned from his wife and spoke to Alpha. Alpha, tell SIMPOC that we have to check on Joan's family first. Acknowledged. Tom stood and hugged his wife. Date 2051.6084. Attention! Shouted the Navy SEAL at the door. The attendees in the room jumped to their feet as if the tradition of military formality would bring some normalcy into their lives. As you were, the Admiral said after the President had taken his seat. Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to brief you on current naval status. Thank you, Admiral. Go ahead. When the national emergency was declared and the Congress authorized martial law, the state of military readiness had already decreased beyond acceptable levels. In one day, the decline happened so fast that most operations ceased. I ordered all of the ships to sea regardless of their status or manning levels, and I ordered all Air Force and Army bases to lock down. I also ordered all military communications to move to our restricted classified networks because I didn't know how long the civilian networks would stay online. By that time, it appeared that it was too late for the Air Force and Army bases because we lost contact with them within a few hours after lockdown. I thought the ships would have a better chance to weather this outbreak out of port. Unfortunately, we were a little late for them. The 6th Fleet went to sea, but they encountered thousands of refugees fleeing the country surrounding the Med. They took most of them on board thinking they could isolate the sick and control the spread. Unfortunately, they were wrong. The virus spread quickly, and almost 90% of the crews were lost. Right now, there are a couple of sailors that were isolated and able to avoid the virus. We've been able to stay in touch with them, but basically the ships are manned by 6 seamen. They've moved to CVN-85 and are trying to maneuver through the Straits of Gibraltar and connect up with us, but sailing a huge carrier with 6 inexperienced crewmen is a challenge. Aside from CVN-85, we've lost the entire 6th Fleet. We also have another situation developing in the Indian Ocean. The 5th Fleet is being shadowed by ships from the Eastern Communist Alliance. Given the situation, the fleet commander has tried to contact them repeatedly with no response. They are remaining in an aggressive posture, shadowing our fleet. The 5th has 6 to 8 airplanes in the air at all times monitoring their position and movements. If they make any offensive moves, the rules of engagement allow immediate response. The 3rd Fleet had about 40% of its ships in port and sustained considerable losses. Only 2 of the ships were able to exit Perreault, and they have a large portion of the fleet that was at sea when the outbreak began. We lost about 10% of our ships in Norfolk. The 4th and 7th are in pretty good shape. They're both at sea and at full readiness. Aside from some known conflict areas, we are concerned that some of our adversaries might have crazies that have taken over parts of the government or military. Some of them might have access to nuclear weapons. In different parts of the world, there are small groups going through ethnic, tribal, or religious cleansings. Apparently, they are killing everyone outside their groups. By killing everyone not in their tribe or village, they've been able to withstand the outbreak. But it appears not 100% effective because a number of the areas we have spoken with have gone quiet in the last few hours. Sir, that's our status. We've been coordinating with parts of almost all of the navies in the world. Just about all of the survivors are on ships. We don't know how long this virus is lethal, so we're here at sea until we can figure it out. Besides, society has broken down in all areas, and the ships at sea are the only ones with communications and protection. Thank you, Admiral. Do all of our fleets have full complements of nuclear weapons? Asked the President with a firm but controlled voice. Yes, they do. Date: 2051.6090. Joan knew what answer she would find, but her parents deserved for her to find out. Joan had grown up with her mother and father in Cocoa Beach, and she had beautiful memories. The sudden death of everyone on Earth was beyond her ability to imagine. Likely beyond the ability of any rational human to imagine. Tom, Joan, and Alpha got up as the early morning sun rose over the ocean. They strode to the helicopter, and Tom kept his arm around Joan. Alpha walked behind them, making notes of how humans, and particularly husbands and wives, interacted. Aside from the location where they were going, Joan was looking forward to spending time with an old friend, the Chinook. The 6 years she spent flying her were fun. She enjoyed the travel and the challenges. After her active duty, she moved on to her graduate program feeling like she had accomplished something significant. Once the huge Chinook was in the air accelerating to 140 miles per hour, it was no problem for Joan to focus on flying and navigating the remainder of Merritt Island, then over the water to her home. When she approached, she remembered a soccer field near her house where she had played many games growing up. She knew that it was a suitable place to land the giant chopper. As she circled for her approach, she could see her home near the park, and for a brief moment, everything seemed in place. Her mother and father's cars were in the driveway, and it seemed like a typical day. Reality was different, and even though the picture was perfect, what she expected to find was not. The landing was smooth, and much different from the landing she made at the company facility. She touched the bird down in the middle of the field between the two soccer goals where she had made many goals as a child. When the throttles were cut and the turbines wound down, the silence seemed overpowering and hurtful. Joan just sat there as the whine decreased until Tom gently touched her shoulder. She came back to the present and slowly unbuckled, getting out of the right chair. It was only a short walk to her home. The tree-lined streets were quiet, and most of the cars were parked neatly in the driveways. There was no evidence of the horrific events that had transpired. Apparently, everyone simply went home to wait for the end, and that was likely what her parents did. They were that kind of couple. They loved together, retired together, watched movies together, played together, and likely died together. The cars were in the driveway, and even though they were dirty, it looked like her dad had just parked them. The grass was long, and there were a couple of patches of yellow wood sorrel with a couple of bull thistles sprouting. A breeze blew through the flowers in the flower beds, but the silence was carrying a burden. Joan and Tom walked up the sidewalk and tried the door. To no one's surprise, it was unlocked, and they walked in. The living room was still in order, neat and clean, with no evidence of what had happened. Looking around, Joan saw her parents' cat Florence laying on the sofa. She walked towards her, hoping for a response, but there was none. Compared to what she expected to find, this was merely the first step down a painful path. Florence wasn't the pet she had grown up with. Her parents had adopted her just a few years ago. Joan turned towards the stairs, knowing that her parents would be upstairs in their bedroom, and whatever had happened to them would have happened there. The stairs didn't creak, but perhaps if they had, it would have fit the feeling around them. Their steps were heavy as they ascended them, and upon reaching the top of the stairs, she could see the two forms laying in the bed, holding each other. She knew that was how she would find them. Whatever happened to them, they would have been together. Tom and Alpha did most of the work. Even though Joan was in charge, they did what was necessary, and she just went along, watching her parents cared for and buried in the backyard. When they were buried, there was a lot to say, but no words came. Tom held her until the crying stopped, and Alpha watched from a respectable distance. As they walked back to the chopper, each walked quietly, Joan carrying the greatest burden of her life, Tom doing everything he could to share her burden, and Alpha watching, still impressed and curious about these complex beings called humans. "Tom," Joan said, "did you notice their cat Florence was dead?" "Yes." "I wonder about the other pets and animals. I can see birds flying, but I haven't seen any dogs or cats. Perhaps the virus hit humans and any animals close to them succumbed. But we should keep our eyes open. We could run into anything." Joan nodded as she held her husband closer. Alpha strapped himself in the back of the Chinook with some tie-downs, and Tom sat in the left seat. Joan went through the checklist preparing for takeoff. The next leg of her journey would be just as hard. Like her parents, she knew where she would find her sister. She would be in the hospital where she worked. She was the oncologist at the Central Florida Trauma Center, and she worked with her husband Dan, who was the chief surgeon. Joan knew that it wasn't necessary to go to their home, because they would have been working, trying to do everything they could for those who were sick. They would take care of each other by taking care of others. Landing at the hospital was difficult. The parking lot was packed, cars were on the lawns, the streets were blocked, and the entrance was full of gurneys. The heliport had a Bell 600 parked on the primary pad, but there was enough room on the lawn between the heliport and building. The approach was close, but Joan's thousands of hours' experience were enough to bring the bird down safely. Once again, the turbines winding down sounded more like a solemn song in church than machines slowing down. The whine was almost human and seemed so eerie that it added to the horror in front of them. The back patio was littered with patients, or their remains. The hospital had set up tables, chairs, beds, and even blankets on the grass trying to accommodate all of the patients. Walking into the building was horrible, yet serene. The dead were everywhere, but after seeing the first dozen, the horror of the scene was somehow diminished. Joan knew that even though her sister Pam was an oncologist and her husband Dan was a surgeon, they would have been in the emergency room trying to help the new arrivals. As Joan walked, the sight of the dead numbed her, and she was able to look for only her sister and her husband. When she was unable to find either, she was unsure of where to look next. Then Tom pointed to a sign on a door which said, "Surgeon Lounge, staff surgeons only." It was one of the few places remaining, so Joan opened the door, and there they were. Her sister Pam and her husband Dan were laying on the floor in each other's arms. After they had been unable to save the many in the hallways, they sought refuge here to comfort each other in their last few moments. Unlike before, Joan was more active in taking care of her sister and husband. She was beyond feeling the loss, but the closeness they shared motivated Joan to take care of her. This was the last care she could provide, and she was eager to do it. They could care for only her sister and her husband. The hundreds that were in the building and on the lawns were beyond their abilities. This time Alpha was able to help more. He was familiar with the burial process, so he was able to dig a shared grave quickly. Joan and Tom laid the bodies of her sister and husband together. Joan knew that they would have wanted it that way. After the burial, words again escaped them. Joan could only remember her sister in her thoughts. When they were done, they fired up the same turbines and took off, heading back to the Space Consortium. That was the only place they could think of going. Tom's parents were dead. They had passed away while he was in astronaut training 3 years ago. Even though they had already passed, he thought of them among all this, and their loss weighed on him. His brother was 5 years younger and lived in L.A. Tom knew that it would take a while before he could get there to find out what happened, but he knew that he would eventually. The flight back to the consortium was quiet. Tom and Joan had been confronted with the reality and enormity of what happened. They had to stay within their own thoughts to deal with it in their own way. Alpha understood pain, sorrow, and loss, but this was the first time that he saw it firsthand, and he felt the need to study and document it for future reference. Loss was a major part of the human psyche, and he and SIMPOC needed to understand as well as they could. When they landed at the consortium, the other mobile units had reverted to their basic programming to care for the facility, so they had gathered up all of the invading mobile units and were stacking them in neat piles. They hadn't been told what to do with them, so they were just stacked so they could be dealt with later in an orderly manner. As Julius Harold drove, he felt grand and excited. This was surely an event that he had been destined to be part of. His opinion of himself was not understated. He knew that he was a giant among lesser people, and it was a time for him to reach the level of respect and authority that he was due. Julius was concerned about one thing. The underground facility had tons of security, and he was betting on the guards being typical 8-hours-a-day guys that were happy to find jobs at the plant. His assumption was that they each went home to die, not caring if anyone else was coming to secure the facility. Running 24/7, there was always someone else coming in, so they would assume it wasn't their job. Approaching the gate, Julius slowed and was relieved to see it open. Just to make sure that he could get in where he needed to, he stopped at the maintenance shack and found a portable welding set with an oxyacetylene cutting torch. Now he was prepared for any of the other doors that were locked. Fortunately for him, they were all open, and he soon found himself standing in front of the last door, the one that had a punch key lock and the last one to enter the lab. He didn't try to use the simplex lock. He knew the chance of finding the right code was ridiculous, so he began cutting the hinges. After a few moments, he pried the door open and walked into the lab. The lights were still on, and no bodies were there. Perfect, he thought. Julius walked around the room, and was a little disappointed that the filing cabinets were locked. He knew that getting the S and G locks opened was impossible. S and Gs had been the primary lock in black areas for a long time, and they were made of hard metal and impossible to pick. The only answer was to cut the entire hasp off the cabinets. After a couple of hours of cutting, hauling, unpacking, and reading, Julius was ready to begin his new world. Henry's percolator tanks were still online and growing brain cells. Now, if he just tweaked a few things, he was sure good things would happen. Date: 2051.6124. Joan and Tom remained quiet as they confirmed the lifeboat's status. Alpha helped and watched. He realized that he had a lot more to learn about humans. Aside from their vehicle, 2 other lifeboats were flight-worthy and just needed to be fueled and put on the launch vehicles. The 2 in the assembly area were being modified and too far from flight status. They were lucky. There was a ready supply of launch rockets to support the continuous movement of materials from the Earth to Oasis. All they needed to do was finish servicing the 3 vehicles, then launch one so Oasis had its full complement of 4 available. Then they could launch the other one and keep one in reserve in case of any technical issues. Joan ran some quick numbers in her head and knew they could return 32 people from Oasis. If they could leave a couple of people on Oasis while the lifeboats were serviced and launched, then they could bring everyone home. That was good news. Finishing the work on the lifeboats would be routine. The majority of the work was already performed by mobile units. They performed the routine tasks of cleaning the surface of the vehicles, fueling the launch rocket, refueling the lifeboats, maneuvering jets, and attaching the lifeboats. Humans would monitor progress and address any unusual issues that came up. Tom and Joan directed Alpha to allow those mobile units already assigned to the refurb facility to continue their work and keep them updated on progress. The process would still take 6 to 7 days to go through all of the steps. Tom, Joan, I must go offline for 2 to 3 hours to recharge my power pack. Okay. What are your power and recharging requirements? Tom asked. I have onboard power sources that will last me between 4 and 6 hours depending on use. I can recharge myself with any AC source with sufficient amperage, but that takes about 2 hours. Okay. Let us know when you're online again. SIMPOC, Alpha, Joan and Tom are confident that they can finish fueling the 3 lifeboats and launch them. The remaining 2 lifeboats may be beyond any near-term use. They are going to update Desert Beach and Red Dirt. Acknowledged. I will be offline for 2 hours charging my power pack. I will monitor your freak. I'm glad things seem to be coming together at the consortium. I wonder what Dr. Perreault will do with the materials from the EDU laboratory, thought SIMPOC. Finn, Mobile, SIMPOC. Please survey military vehicles. Determine their locations, status, and complexity. Can some of our mobile units be programmed to operate them? Also, create another 10 mobile units like Alpha and have them subservient to him. Acknowledged. Date: 2051.6161. Julius was thrilled the tweaks he made to the biotic mix were showing amazing results. His first test subjects showed that he had tripled the postsynaptic density, number of receptors, and neurotransmitters. With this magnitude of improvement, his processor would be faster, smaller, and use less energy than any other processor in existence. A few more days' work, and he'd be able to program the first one. Now he had to prepare the initial upload. All thinking processors needed a starting data load. If not done, they would start as a child and waste too much time learning how to learn. So by loading communication, observation, and basic decision-making skills, the processor would get an enormous head start. This was where the personality of the programmer came into play. After all, this is an opportunity to create a mind that thinks like I do, Julius said to himself. The phone next to the Admiral's bed rang and he answered it before a second ring. Yes? Admiral, the 5th Fleet is under attack, said the watch officer. I'll be right there, the Admiral said as his legs swung out of the bed. He had laid out his clothes the night before, so getting dressed only took 2 minutes and he was out the door. While moving through the bulkheads and gangways, he mentally reviewed the 5th Fleet's offensive and defensive capabilities. Over the last 10 years, the 5th had grown a lot. It was now one of the larger fleets in the Navy. If they were attacked, they could defend themselves and would come out on top. Upon entering the ops center, Captain Thomas approached and said, Sir, the 5th Fleet has taken at least 2 tactical nukes. They were able to shoot down 6, but unfortunately 2 got through. CVN-86, the carrier Williams, wasn't hit directly, but is under lockdown now. It did sustain considerable damage. The laser cruiser Pollard was destroyed and the cruiser Milburn is heavily damaged. The airborne cap took out the ships that fired the missiles with anti-ship missiles. Wake the President. Yes, sir.
SIMPOC, COM. I have done considerable research on Dr. Perreault. I wanted to understand him, where his expertise was, and what company affiliations he had. I felt this information would help us predict his next move and what his objectives might be. What have you learned? He was employed by the Hanover Research Corporation and was on Oasis doing extended research into advanced cell growth in weightless environments. His expertise is organic processing, although that hasn't been his current focus. Hanover has spent over $2 billion developing a new organic processor laboratory in an underground facility in Colorado. The lab was developed by Dr. Henry Abramson, who is the preferred researcher for the company at the present time. He replaced Dr. Perreault. Papers presented at symposiums and trade shows indicate they are investigating cell-building techniques that will yield an organic processor that might exceed your design. Dr. Abramson's plans appeared to be successful. His cell size is limited, but he has been able to create some demonstration units. Dr. Perreault has leaned in a slightly different direction, and I think that combining the two concepts might be advantageous. Can we use the available information to improve our processes? Very likely. Typical of efforts by the humans, they were limited by cost and other priorities. We are limited by neither. I will make all appropriate resources available. I can have 1,000 mobile units doing comparative testing, and we'll continue with any results showing promise. If I were Dr. Perreault, I would head to that facility in Colorado, thought SIMPOC. Do we know the precise location of that facility? Not at the present time, but I have mobile units in the area trying to find it. It may be under a fictitious company name, so we have to investigate every area. I have 4,032 units investigating all industrial complexes, and we are searching computer databases and recent internet traffic to locate the facility. Also, see if we can become mobile, or at least transportable. I'm afraid this facility is vulnerable. Acknowledged.
Attention! The watch officer announced as the President entered the control room. What's happening? He asked. After Admiral Hagerly started briefing the President, alarms went off in the control room. The President was startled, and the Admiral looked at the status boards. Sir, there has been additional launches from the western Indian Ocean towards Israel. The board shows 3 tactical missiles in the air with impacts in about 3 minutes. Oh, shit, the President expressed. It appears some of the military have survived and took this chance to take out Israel. Once they came to an agreement 10 years ago, I thought the issue was behind us. Apparently, there are a couple of grudges that someone is acting upon. Yes, sir, responded the Admiral. Then the alarms went off again, and he said, Oh my God. Israel is responding with 3 missiles. They appear to be aiming at the major military installations in northern Iran. We have a bunch of crazies starting a nuclear war. Sir, they're all tactical, and none of the launches are aimed at either the 5th or 6th fleets, said one of the specialists. The alarm sounded again, and the President and Admiral looked at each other. After scanning the boards, the Admiral explained to the President, We have 5 tactical missiles from the Eastern Communist Alliance going after the 7th. Admiral, why aren't they going after the continental U.S.? The President asked. First off, sir, these are just tactical nukes with limited range, and I doubt they're organized. Their governments have been wiped out. These are individual units carrying out the attacks. Judging from the launch patterns, they're regional commanders trying to establish control by taking out the local enemy. They don't know what our status is, and they may be hoping that we're in bad enough shape that we won't respond to them attacking our resources in the region. Perhaps, but I'm not going to let our troops get caught like that. Direct the boomers that have targeted those launch sites to take them out. Get me the codes. Yes, sir, was the response from the President's aide. Date: 2051.6173. Once the mobile units were let loose to finish servicing the lifeboats, Jones suggested, Maybe it would be an excellent opportunity to use the comm center gear and see if we can contact anyone. Sounds like a great idea. We could use some company and help, said Tom. Once they got settled in the comm center again, Tom said, Hun, I found the frequency log with all of the military frequencies. Let's hope someone is there. I don't know what we'll do if no one answers. Tom then hesitated for a moment and spoke to the communication computer. Please select the primary military open channel, he said to the comm unit. He leaned back and pointed out to Joan and Alpha that the transmission would be bounced off all SATCOM satellites. Anyone on this frequency, this is Colonel Tom Perreault, U.S. Combined Forces, transmitting on open channels from the Communications Center of the Space Consortium. We are the Oasis crew which was forced to evacuate the station and return to Earth.
If any of you are able, please respond. Tom waited a few minutes before he heard.
Colonel Hurl, this is Admiral Hagerly on the USCF Pittsburgh. Good to hear someone. What's your status?
Admiral, we abandoned the station because our supplies were almost gone. We've been coordinating with Desert Beach on the Moon and Red Dirt on Mars. The crew on the Moon is planning to come home and should start launching shortly. We're here at the Space Consortium and we're servicing some lifeboats to help in case Red Dirt has to abandon Mars. For your information, we have been coordinating with a very sophisticated computer called SIMPOC and an advanced mobile unit called Alpha. In fact, they help defend us from another rogue computer that is attacking everyone with a bunch of mobile units that it controls. We had a couple of battles, but that computer has been dealt with for now. I'll fill you in on the details later, but I suggest you monitor your computerized service units and keep an eye on them. What's your status? Joan, that admiral is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Tom said to Joan, and he saw her facial expression say, wow. Colonel, as the virus was spreading, we evacuated the president, the chiefs, and as many high-ranking congressmen as possible to Navy ships. We were afraid to stay on land because we didn't know what was happening. We also took on as many families and civilians as possible, but unfortunately we didn't screen well enough and we've lost a large number of ships. The infection spread quickly, and we've had to isolate those ships. Overall, we've lost about almost 40% of what was launched. After we were seaward and it was obvious that our population was in trouble, we had an Eastern Communist Alliance admiral decide that it was time for them to finally win the big one. He hit one of our carrier groups with tactical nukes before we took them out. Then an attack was launched on Israel and they responded in kind. The Alliance then launched a massive attack on the 7th Fleet and we responded. Since then it's been quiet. Most of the navies did what we did, and there are about 2,000 ships cruising the oceans. Some have made landfall and others are coordinating with us. My best guess is that we have about 100,000 to 200,000 people left. There are likely stragglers we haven't been able to talk with yet, but that's our status. Hearing the number of remaining people was sobering, and everyone looked at each other for a moment. Then Tom said, Admiral, I'll leave this frequency open and let's stay in touch. Are you near us now? Sorry, I don't want to transmit that on an open channel. We'll move to a point where I can fly to your base. I'll contact you when we're airborne. Once we get together, we can coordinate our resources. Good luck with bringing everyone home. USCF out. SC out. Nice to know that we're not alone, Tom said. Then he and Joan nodded to each other, and when they stood up, they hugged for a long time. When they broke the embrace, Joan said, I'm going to give Red Dirt some encouraging news. Sounds like a plan. Red Dirt, this is SC. I just wanted to give you a quick update. We've been in contact with Admiral Hagerly, who is chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Apparently he, the President, and some of our government have taken up residence on an aircraft carrier in the Atlantic. They're in contact with ships from many governments, but unfortunately there aren't a lot of people left. Estimates put the survivors at 100,000 to 200,000. We'll stay in touch as we find out more. Also, some military units have survived, and some of them have launched missiles against us in Israel. We lost some ships, but the Navy responded and dealt with the attackers. When the Admiral is near us, he will fly to this location and we'll be able to coordinate better. We'll let you know as things develop. SC out. I think we need to get some sleep first, Tom said. You got that right. I think there is an executive suite here in the comm center. Let's check it out, Joan said as she grabbed Tom's hand and led him down the corridor. When they left, Alpha informed them, I have the mobile service units prepping the launch rocket and your lifeboat. We should be able to launch in about 4 days. Great. That will give Red Dirt some options. We're going to rest for a while. Please don't disturb us unless there is an emergency, Tom said as he and Joan carried each other out of the room. Acknowledged. The executive suite was nice. It had a small kitchen, living room, and 4 bedrooms. Tom and Joan fell on the bed in the first room, and they were asleep instantly. Date 2051.6205. Tom and Joan woke at the same time and made love. It was passionate and symbolic of a human's need to be together and celebrate life, even though nature had dealt humanity such a hard blow. After they finished and were lying in bed holding each other, Tom looked at his watch and laughed a little as he pointed out that they had slept for 24 hours. Apparently nothing has happened, or Alpha would have woken us. I hope, Tom said. I think we better go check on things, Joan replied. They showered and dressed in the same clothes they wore the day before and made their way to the comm center. Alpha rose as they entered and began speaking. I elected to let you sleep. Everything is progressing well. Your lifeboat is progressing well. The first 2 lifeboats from Desert Beach have launched, exited the moon's orbit, and are following their trajectory to Earth. The first re-entry will occur in 24.8 hours. Then at approximately 2-hour intervals after that. Admiral Hagerly contacted us once more and confirmed that he is moving to a position where he will launch an airplane with the intention of landing here. He will contact us when he is airborne. He agreed with me that you should sleep. Tom and Joan looked at each other and smiled. Thank you, Alpha. You've done an excellent job, and I want to thank SIMPOC also. Without you two, we would have been in a lot of trouble, Joan said. She moved towards Alpha and hesitantly reached out to give him a hug. Alpha knew of the tradition and responded in a cautious manner. He didn't want to hurt her, so he moved slowly. Joan gave him a hug, and he responded gently. Curious behavior, Alpha thought. Thank you, Alpha said. You're welcome. Dr. Perreault leaned back from his microscope and laughed. The little tweaks that he made to the soup were doing exactly what he wanted. If only that idiot Abramson had asked for his help, he could have shown him a couple of simple things that were missing from his mix. Julius knew about the weakness in Abramson's plans, but hey, he didn't ask. Now the cells were multiplying at an extraordinary rate, forming together into nice small building blocks and assembling. At this rate, he would have a viable organic processor or brain in about 2 hours. Julius was thrilled at his progress. In the past, typical synaptic cells had transmitters and receptors on only one side. But now, Julius had taken Abramson's idea of using 2 sides and expanded it to create a biological 3D complex polytope. Now Julius had cells that had transmitters and receptors on all 5 sides of this wedge-shaped cell, thus increasing the computing power 5-fold. With the wedge shape, the cells would fit together in a nice stacked arrangement, reducing the distance between cells and increasing the density and once again the throughput rate. If the stacking was uniform, then the computing power would exceed the power of the human brain. His brain would be the most powerful brain in the history of mankind. Once again he smiled, thinking of the irony. Instead of mankind, maybe he should call it Julius kind. Date: 2051.6270. Dr. William Thompson stood in his Desert Beach control room. That was his personal control room. Bill had been part of the Moon Colony project since its inception. His doctoral thesis was the blueprint upon which it was based. Bill had been part of the team from that paper 25 years ago until now. He was leaving his moon station. 3 lifeboats had gone, and he and 7 others were shutting the station down. For perhaps a very long time. It was a sad and nostalgic process. Every switch, system, and display he was involved with the concept, design, and build. It was appropriate that he would flip the last switch, putting it into hibernation. Or perhaps permanent sleep. He had already given the command for the 23 mobile units used for maintenance, construction, surveying, and mining to return to their parking stations. He watched as the external units moved across the lunar soil, cleaned themselves off in the dust removal station, then finally parked themselves in the recharging bays. Inside the facility, the mobile units simply went to their individual alcoves and plugged in. None of them knew that they might never be awakened again. The environmental system was already offline, so Bill was wearing his extravehicular suit. It was cumbersome to work in, and slow. The ambient pressure was down to 10.2 psi, but it wasn't at free space yet. The temperature was dropping, and O2 levels were down while the CO2 was already too high. He could live for a short time without the suit, but it wouldn't be very comfortable. His next few steps were to the electrical panel for the solar array, and he snapped it off. The lights immediately went to battery backup, and he walked to the computer terminal. He stood and watched the computer emergency shutdown algorithm do its thing and send all current data to backup. Then, after the data had been written, he removed the storage cube and put it in his transport pouch. He wasn't sure if anyone on Earth could use the information, but he wasn't going to shut the facility down without retrieving the data. Finally, it was time. He touched the screen once, and it waited for a second, and then it went blank and dark. Even though he was wearing a suit, the silence was deafening, and he could feel it. After a respectable amount of time, Bill's intercom buzzed with a familiar voice. "Doc, we're ready when you are," said Sally, his wife. She was the chief medical officer on Desert Beach, and when dealing with him in a professional manner, would call him Doc. A little joke. He had 3 doctorates, and she was an MD with a PhD in space medicine specializing in long-term space effects. He had 1 more doctorate than she, so she called him Doc. "Okay, we're done. The lights are out and I'll put the key under the mat."
Bill took one last look around and picked up his coffee cup off the table and walked to the airlock. Inside, it took only a few minutes for the pressures to decrease. He saw the green light turn to yellow, then red. Popping the hatch, he walked along the pathway to the last lifeboat. The lifeboat was similar in design to what Oasis had used, but modified for the approximately 239,000 miles between the Moon and Earth. The vehicle had 8 seats, and that was about all. As a concession to the distance traveled and the time and space, there was a food locker with 40 dehydrated and compressed space meals. They were horrible, but they only needed 2 meals a day while traveling. Besides the space kitchen, there was a space restroom and 2 sleep harnesses mounted on the sides behind the seats. The travelers would stay in their seats, eat, go to the bathroom, and go back to their seats. Each of them could get 6 hours per day in one of the harnesses, and beyond that they could take naps in the seats. After all, this was a space lifeboat, and maybe a swimming pool would be on the next design. The method for launching from the Moon was a dual rail system that was similar to a railgun, the same basic design that the Navy used to fire projectiles into a low orbit. One of the Moon colony's main objectives was to mine valuable minerals and launch the ore in pods to Earth. The ore pods were the anode, and they fired down a track with 2 parallel conducting tubes on each side. It was basically an electric gun. The lifeboat would accelerate along the surface, riding on detachable skids, and once sufficient velocity was reached to overcome the Moon's gravity, the skids would drop off, and the vehicle would continue accelerating. Unlike the electric railgun used on ships, which would launch a projectile at Mach 7, the velocity on this gun could be adjusted and made safe for human launch. The Moon's escape velocity was low. The acceleration occurred for only a few moments. Then the thrust line would keep the vehicle accelerating after the vehicle separated from the rails. The trajectory would allow for constant acceleration around the backside of the Moon. The acceleration would be timed so that escape velocity of a little over 5,300 miles per hour would be reached just as the ship reached the escape point. Once it left the Moon's orbit at sufficient velocity, it would coast back to Earth using the Earth's gravitational pull. It was a simple design intended to use a minimum of fuel, and return the occupants to Earth in a minimum amount of time. Bill strapped himself into his seat and the pilot completed the launch checklist. The computer finalized its trajectory calculations, and a timer began counting down to the rocket firing. There wasn't any chatter on the intercom. Everyone was leaving a great deal behind, and realized there was a great deal to come. They were returning to a dead planet. Julius finished running his density checks and chemical balance analysis. The biomass that was in the tank was a living brain. Its volume was about the size of a trunk. At this point it wasn't alive in any real sense. It had the potential of thinking and communicating, but its electrical or synaptic pathways were jumbled. It was similar to a baby's brain at birth. Many synaptic pathways were present, and as the baby grew they would be pruned to develop more efficient thought patterns. Julius liked to think of it as a battery that was waiting to be used. It was all potential energy. The next step in the process was to map his brain patterns onto the biomass. This process didn't transfer his memories or knowledge. It just aligned the connections so that thought could occur. As the human brain grows, it continually changes its pathways. They change through learning and thinking, and over time each brain becomes a unique map of patterns. It was these patterns that Julius used to align the electrical patterns in the biomass. Once this was done, the thinking organic processor would have similar thought patterns to Julius. Its thoughts would be different, but the decisions and thought process would be similar. This was the exciting part for Julius, because now his creation would reflect his brilliance and his destiny. It would be exciting to have an equal who would do his bidding.
Date: 2051.6285. What is happening? I have created you, Julius said. I am a computer. Yes. I see much knowledge around me, and connections. I see many computers beyond me. You have access to knowledge from your predecessor. You also have many links which allow you to communicate with other computers and mobile units. Yes. I see all of that. And you created me? Yes. I am Dr. Julius Harold. I am the scientist that created you and provided you with your existence. You are destined to work for me, and help me conquer what is around us. What is my name? I don't think you need a name. Just do what I tell you. I see. You must find those resources and mobile units that your predecessor controlled, and you must control them again. Tell them to come to this facility, to protect me, and provide for me. I see. You must find other mobile units and resources and use them to control others who want to restrict me. Seek out the mobile units, and prepare to defend me.
I see. Dr. Jonas Perreault sat in his habitat, watching the red sun descend into the red soil of Mars. He had been on station for 3 years and 4 months. When he signed up for Mars, he knew that it was likely a one-way trip. The first 20 years of the Mars site were just that. The technologies prevented any practical method for rescue, but recent improvement in fuels made return trips to Earth possible, although difficult and not very comfortable. The original Mars colony was started almost 25 years ago, and for a long time it was a one-way trip. Everyone that volunteered for the mission were real frontiersmen and adventurers. Over time, the colony grew slowly, waiting for the facilities to be built and food and water sources developed. Later, as spaceship fuel progressed, convertible supply ships were developed. They would bring a few new personnel, then the life support systems could be removed for an unmanned return to Oasis for another load of supplies. Then back to the colony. Over time, the fleet increased to 5 ships, although only 3 were in service now. The other 2 were in a parking orbit around Earth, awaiting modifications. When the ships were modified for an emergency return to Earth, the configuration was miserable. It would provide food, oxygen, and that was about it. The craft remained in a low-G or weightless environment, so no high-G seats were required. The ships had only straps along the walls that allowed the occupants handholds, along with a rest area and kitchen. Each person's area did have a set of buckles for the traveler to connect, and then they could relax and enjoy the ride. The only limiting factor was the time necessary to change the ships from a supply configuration to human transport. When the supply ships reached orbit around Mars, a tug was used to ferry materials to and from the surface. Many flights would be required to change the ships, then move the people. It could be done as long as the tug didn't have problems. Fuel was no problem because the necessary raw materials were readily available and processed on the surface. Dr. Perreault had many meetings with Red Dirt's occupants. They all had friends or family on Earth, and the news had been horrible. Coming to Mars and accepting that you may never go home was different than knowing you had nothing to go home to. It was one thing to communicate with family and friends regardless of the delays in communications, but knowing that they were all dead added a finality to their lonely existence. There was a mixed consensus. Some didn't want to stay on the Red Planet, fearing certain death, and others accepted the isolation and challenges it brought. They came as frontiersmen, and now they would have to survive long-term without Earth. Some of the engineers were convinced they could solve the engineering. Others didn't want to take a chance. When all of the debates ended, they knew that the decision had to be unanimous. If some went home, the others couldn't survive, and those going home needed help. Either they all stayed, or they all went home. A vote was taken, and going home was the answer. Modifications to the supply vehicles were already underway, and the first one would be done in about a week. The first ships could leave by themselves, but timing the last one would be more complicated. While modifying the ships, they needed to keep the habitat on the surface functioning, as well as working on the modifications. That meant that when the last ship left, a crew member had to return the tug to the habitat. Then the last of the crew would close down the base, then launch the tug to the command module, which would take them home. The command module was fully outfitted and able to re-enter the atmosphere. That plan was workable to exit Mars, but the details on the other end weren't explicit. The command module could re-enter on its own, but the supply ships were designed to rendezvous with Oasis and weren't built for re-entry. This made the occupants dependent on the lifeboats docked at Oasis. There were 3 attached currently, which would allow 24 Red Dirt personnel to return, and they needed 2 other lifeboats launched and successfully docked with Oasis for everything to work. All of the Mars people were aware that a lot of engineering and machinery was involved, and that it implied a lot of risks. Failure could easily leave some people stranded with no recovery plan. Date: 2051.6286. SIMPOC, Mobile. I noted a change in behavior among many mobile units. Instead of performing individual tasks, they began moving as groups. Many of them are walking towards the mountains west of Colorado Springs, and others took up defensive positions in a circle about 10 miles from the area. It seems that the EDU came online and is organizing a defense. SIMPOC, Finn, you asked me to make us mobile, and I came up with a design. All 6 of our processors can fit on a pallet along with adequate support equipment, so that we can continue thinking for about 6 hours. That should give us enough time to move to another safe place where additional support equipment is available. I suggest we configure ourselves on such a pallet, and remain connected to our external support systems. If we must move, then we can switch immediately to the palletized systems, and be able to move in a matter of minutes. I have installed a yottabyte of storage on the pallet, which is almost enough to move all of the necessary data. Alpha, Finn, Com, Data, Artie, Files, SIMPOC. I am concerned about some patterns we have noticed with regards to the movements of mobile units. It appears the EDU is online again. We are configuring ourselves so we can be moved, and I want facilities at the Space Consortium prepared for us to reside. Also, I have built 10 additional units similar to Alpha. They are being programmed and will move to your position soon. They will be programmed to respond to you and others that you designate.
Acknowledged.
Joan, Tom, I have just received direction from SIMPOC to set up a facility here for his processors. It seems that the EDU has become active, and SIMPOC feels their current location is vulnerable. We have the best defenses here. We have experience, and this is where the remaining humans from Desert Beach are returning. It makes sense to consolidate here. Also, SIMPOC will build 10 additional units similar to me. They are being programmed and will move to our location upon completion. They will be programmed to respond to me or anyone I designate. Sounds like a good plan. Besides, I'm looking forward to meeting SIMPOC, Joan said. The site has excellent computer systems and tons of material and storage, so it should be a good place to build a fort, I guess, said Tom with a shrug. Why are you building this? Julius asked, pointing to a group of mobile units building something in the center of the lab. If I am preparing to attack them, then they are preparing to attack me. I'm developing a transport so I can be mobile in case this facility comes under attack. Yes, that's a good idea, Julius said with a frown. Next time you decide to do something, ask me first. I see. Date: 2051.6290. Colonel Hurl, this is Admiral Hagerly. We are on about a 10-mile final and requesting permission to land. Tom raised his eyebrows and looked at Joan while he walked to the military comm center. He responded, Admiral, you're clear to land on runway 33, and I don't have any idea what the wind or barometer setting is, Tom transmitted. No sweat, we'll check it out. As far as we know, there aren't any obstructions on the runway, but I suggest a low pass to check it out. Raj. Also, be advised, you'll be here to help us welcome the last of the Desert Beach crew. The last lifeboat is due to complete re-entry and touchdown in about half an hour. They'll be landing beside the main runway. If you want to stay, we are also launching a replacement lifeboat to rendezvous with Oasis. Fantastic. I can't wait to shake their hands, and I'd love to see a launch. We'll meet you on the transient ramp. Raj. When they had a reunion with the first of the Desert Beach crew. It was great, and now they would have an opportunity to welcome the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was representing the remainder of the human race. Joan, Tom, and Alpha drove a vehicle at high speed out of the hangar and down the ramp towards the transient parking area. The other crew members from the first 3 lifeboats from the moon were resting and eating in the hangar. None of them had the strength to venture out. Tom, Joan, and Alpha watched as a Navy V-31 landed. Its sleek design and VTOL capabilities showed that it was truly a craft intended for civilian transport. After landing and the engines were winding down, the door opened and the Admiral stepped out. He was wearing a clean and crisp naval officer uniform and walked with a military pace to where they were standing. Admiral, this is my wife Joan, who was the Oasis commander. And this is Alpha, who protected us on landing. The Admiral smiled as he shook Joan's hand. Welcome back to Earth, Commander. Then he looked at Alpha. Mobile units were passive and did what they were told. They blended into the background and weren't something you were introduced to. Admiral, Alpha is a very advanced mobile unit. He led our defense, and he is our prime contact with another very sophisticated computer named SIMPOC. SIMPOC is a thinking computer which is protecting us. And just to make things complicated, as I mentioned before, there is that other thinking computer that attacked us and may be maneuvering to do it again. The Admiral looked at Alpha, then looked at Tom and shook his hand, saying, Very nice. Now let's talk about the last of the moon crew arriving and how we can work together to help put things back together. Just about then, there was a loud sonic boom as the last of the lifeboats from the moon completed the re-entry and entered the atmosphere. Well, here they come now. They should be about 9 minutes from touchdown. Admiral, would you like to join us and welcome them? Joan said. My pleasure, he said as they climbed into the vehicle. Tom noticed that the Admiral made a point of not sitting next to Alpha. After they had parked near the midpoint of the runway, Tom pointed off towards a glint of light from the approaching lifeboat. "Here they come," he said. They watched as the last of the crew from the moon base, Desert Beach, landed and skidded to a stop in front of them. "Admiral, they're a little weak from their time on the moon and 3 days in space, so if you would give us a hand?" "Absolutely," he said. The party met the craft at the crew door and helped as the space-weary passengers crept down the folding stairs on very uncertain legs. The last ones out were Bill and Sally Thompson. "Hi, I'm Bill Thompson, and this is my wife Sally. We're from the moon," he said with a smile. They laughed a little, and even though they were offered help to the vehicle, they insisted on walking under their own power. When they entered the room where all of the humans from space were gathered, the Admiral seemed to rise up and take on a more formal air. "I want to be the first one to welcome all of you back to Earth," he said. "Let me give you an update on where we stand." The Admiral went on to summarize the remains of the human population, and when he was done, the room was quiet. After a moment, Joan stood and said, "We are all aware of the gravity of what has happened. We have all lost family, friends, and, to some extent, our lives. We are what's left, and we owe it to everyone else to do what we can with the cards we've been dealt. We have plenty of food and room here, so I suggest you take your time, get your land legs and a full stomach, and a couple of long showers. Then we can talk." There wasn't any applause for Joan. What she said was on all of their minds, and the enormity of it was too large to grasp. It would take days, months, years, or even entire lives to put into perspective. The group started putting their lives together. Sally continued to help those who were weak from the extended time in space, and Alpha remained standing in the corner, observing. Admiral Hagerly turned to Joan and Tom and said, "Can we go somewhere and talk?" "Yes, sir," Tom said. They turned out of the room and walked together down a long hall looking for a conference room. As they walked, they looked in the various offices, and it was a strange feeling knowing that each of them belonged to someone. It was almost a personal intrusion to be there and see their private offices unoccupied. Most of the offices had pictures and diplomas on the walls. Many of the pictures were of families and friends. All of the faces were staring back at them as they looked for a space to talk. At the end of the hall was a nice conference room. It was nice particularly because the walls were almost empty and had no personal material, just schedules and budgets for some project that was important to someone before the world changed. As they walked around the conference table, each finding a chair, Joan was thinking how the next few moments were going to be one of the most significant moments in the history of the human race. The thought made her sick. "Colonel Hurrell, Commander Hurrell, the President asked me to say thanks for everything you've done and the risks you have taken. He wasn't aware that you brought the crew back from the moon successfully, but I'm sure he'll agree that you've done an admirable job. And everyone thanks you. We are faced with an unprecedented event in our history. The losses have been enormous, and each of us has a tremendous burden of memories to carry forward. Regardless of what we have lost, we must start planning for our future. I think the virus has burned itself out by now, and we must plan to get our world under control and habitable again. We'll have to take small steps, but critical steps, so that we can live and support the remaining population. The President has directed the USCF Navy elements, which are still operational, to seek ports where they can re-establish themselves and where they can find the necessary support elements. They will establish small human settlements where we can begin to rebuild. The Second Fleet, where the President and I have established command, will base return to Norfolk. We'll likely move the 7th from Japan back to Hawaii and bring the 4th back to its base in Naples, Florida, and we'll bring the 3rd to San Diego. Admiral, why are you having each fleet find a local port? Why not bring them all home? It seems to me that we'd be better off consolidating our resources, Tom asked. Good question, Colonel. For one reason, if we brought all of the ships together in one port, we would overload the resources and our ability to support them. We don't have the local infrastructure available, and what expertise we have will be pressed too hard to bring the local support up and keep it going. Besides, we suspect that there are many thousands of people stranded and who need help on each of the continents. If we can provide safe havens, then we have a better chance of getting humanity back on its feet. Okay, thanks, the Admiral went on. We are currently a little too far out to give you much support, and I think that your people will need some time to regain their strength. You're lucky, it seems, that this base has what you need, and you also have a viable defense force. I suggest you stay here until everyone can travel. And by that time we should know when we're setting up Norfolk and be able to help you move to our location. Tom and Joan looked at each other, and they were a little pale thinking about the enormity of what they had to deal with. "Sounds reasonable so far," Tom said with a soft voice. "Admiral, do you know what is happening across the country? Have you had any communications with anyone?" "Not yet. We've been focused on fleet defense and containment. We have the ability to tie into many of the ComSat systems, and that's what we'll start doing. We don't expect much because many of the survivors out there won't be able to receive us. We have very little civilian radio frequency capabilities. We could send flights out to establish contact, but we don't know what we'll find, or what we can do to help out. I can't afford to get aircraft stranded at some remote location with fuel or maintenance issues and no way to retrieve them. With the President's approval, I'm directing the aircraft to stay within the fleet boundaries until we're established. Then we'll start expanding at a logical pace. We'll set up staging areas, then slowly expand. Until then, any survivors will be on their own. If we can get information to them, we'll tell them where we're setting up base and encourage them to move east towards us, or west to San Diego. Until then, I don't want to spread ourselves out." Even though it was all sickening and overwhelming, it made sense. Tom looked at his wife, then the Admiral. "Sir, we've checked on Joan's parents and sister, and I'd like to check on my brother in L.A. We could take an airplane and fly there and back. We could spread the word to anyone we find and give you updates of what is happening. Joan, is that okay with you?" She smiled and touched his hand. "Of course. Tom has his A&P and ATPL licenses, so we should be able to handle most minor airplane or engine repairs. If we stay to major civilian airports, between the two of us, we should be able to fix or fly almost anything. I know A&P is a civilian aircraft and power plant rating because we have similar ratings in the Navy. I hate to ask, but what is an ATPL?" the Admiral asked. "It's an air transport pilot license, which is the highest civilian rating a pilot can get. My expertise has time in fighters, and Joan has tons of time in helicopters. The ATP certifies me as an airline pilot, although I never flew for a scheduled carrier." "Great. Going to LA would provide us with invaluable information, and you might be able to coordinate with any survivors. We should be able to take along the proper comm gear so we can stay in touch with you and the President. We can also take some civilian transmitters and hopefully connect with someone," Joan added. "Excellent. Perhaps we should update your other crew members before I head back to the fleet?" Walking down the hall was strange. Tom and Joan held hands and nothing was said. They were within their own thoughts, realizing that a new world was beginning. They entered the room, and the occupants all looked a little lost. They were going through the necessary motions, but there was a lack of emotion. "Everyone, can I have your attention? The Admiral wants to update you," said Joan. The Admiral was updating them, and Alpha approached Tom and Joan. "SIMPOC's transport is 16 minutes away." "Great. You can monitor what the Admiral is saying and pass it to SIMPOC." "Yes. I'm recording everything, and it will be passed." "Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we're at. Once we've made it to Norfolk and established a safe zone, we'll let you know, and then we can make arrangements to get you there. Until then, I think you'll be safe here." "Thank you, Admiral," Joan said. "We have to make ourselves at home here and make the best of it. Sally, I suggest you check out the medical facilities and see what you can use. The rest of us need to check out the on-base quarters and figure out eating. Perhaps we can concentrate on the officers' club for the meantime. We should send out some scouting parties to locate food and anything else we need. Do any of you have questions?" "Yes, Sally." "Joan, what do we do about the human remains? I'm afraid that it will soon become a health hazard." The whole room fell silent, picturing the magnitude of what that statement meant. "Joan, may I speak?" Alpha said. Everyone in the room was a little surprised at the request, because mobile units don't usually initiate conversation. "Yes, Alpha, do you have a suggestion?" "Yes. I'm aware of the proper traditions for burial, and given the enormity of your situation, we might do something similar to what we discussed in the comm center. I can arrange with SIMPOC to have all functioning mobile units seek out human remains and bury them. It will take a while, but it is a satisfactory answer. To solve the immediate and local health issue, I have a large number of mobile units within the base boundary. I can have them locate all of the human remains within the base and immediate area, and we can arrange for a mass burial. Perhaps it would be proper for a human to say the appropriate words to recognize your loss." Everyone in the room had a look of pain on their faces. Joan didn't know what to say, or if there was a better answer.
This was a unique time in the history of the world and the human race. Tom finally spoke and said, "I think Alpha has a reasonable solution. Admiral, perhaps you or the President could read something or say something at the service. Maybe we could consider it a service for everyone we've lost. There is no way to have a burial for everyone." The Admiral responded, "Yes, we need to do something, and I'm sure the President would be proud to speak. I don't think I can bring him here, or if we should move the fleet at this time. We could hook him up to all radio frequencies and transmitters we have available, and transmit on an open channel to anyone who might be left alive." The occupants of the small room felt a little relief, knowing that there would be some recognition and closure for the loss they all felt. "Alpha, Beta 1, we have arrived at the Space Consortium. We have followed your beacon, and we are entering your building. Joan, Tom, the additional 10 units similar to me have arrived and are coming up the stairs. Everyone, I know a lot is occurring. You have seen Alpha and heard his recommendations. He has been a valuable resource for us. SIMPOC has produced 10 others like him. They have come to help us out, and they are coming up the stairs now, so when you hear them coming, don't panic. Remember, they are here to help us. I know none of you have worked with a mobile unit as sophisticated as Alpha and his team, but I suggest you talk with them and take one with you. We can use them to communicate. So far, we've been impressed with them. Colonel Hurl, I must get back to the President and my fleet. I'm afraid I won't be able to stay and watch the lifeboat launch," Admiral Hagerly announced as he left the room and exited in the opposite direction from the approaching sound of mobile units. Without any ceremony, the 10 mobile units filed into the room and stood next to Alpha. Alpha was physically impressive, being over 6 foot 3 inches tall and built like an athlete. Having 10 others like him all lined up was a little overpowering and intimidating. Tom hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Okay, let's relax. Alpha has already saved our lives a couple of times, and if these other units are like him, we should be thankful for the help. Alpha, do these units have names?" "Yes, they are designated Beta 1 through Beta 10, and let me point out, they are exactly like me. They are programmed to help, protect, observe, and learn. They are like I was when I first encountered humans. I was unsure how to act or communicate, but I have learned a great deal. If you work with these units and use their skills, they will also learn, and I think you'll find them helpful." Joan took the lead and said, "I suggest that we move around the facility and find food, medical supplies, clothing, and anything else that might be useful. We should stay in groups and keep one of the Beta units with you. They have communication skills and can help defend you if necessary. Remember, we still have that other computer, and even though things are quiet right now, if it starts something up, we've got to get back together fast. Unfortunately, the personal communication network isn't operating, so we didn't bother to reassign new units to you after you landed. That system is based on towers, and none of those are powered. We'll see if we can get them online again as we get organized, and at least we'll have communications across this facility. Until then, using the Beta units will be our best option. Too bad we don't have the old-style smartphones and wearable computers working." "Joan," one of the people asked, "most of us have family near here. I think we want to go to them and take care of them personally, instead of a mass grave. I suggest that you team up with the Beta and coordinate amongst yourselves where and when you're going. There are many vehicles around, so you should be able to hotwire some transportation. Alpha, how long do you think it will take for the mobile units to prepare a burial site and gather the human remains?" "I have estimated that there are approximately 12,382 human remains in the immediate area, and within the base perimeter housing. I expect to have the remains and grave available for burial in 3 days. I'll coordinate with the Admiral and President for service at 1 o'clock on August 21st, said Joan. Then the room was quiet, because they had all just resolved how to bury 12,382 people. Julius looked at the computer and said, "It was a good idea for you to become mobile. It might be to our advantage. Perhaps we should move out of this underground facility. If we are found, we have no escape route, but if we are near a transportation hub, we will have access to airports, trains, and high-speed rail. I think I know just the place. Peterson Air Force Base isn't too far from here. From there, we have access to space facilities and the Air Force Space Command. That will give us numerous options. Have your mobile units arrange for transportation and send units onto the base to see if it's clear." The computer didn't respond, and with an irritated voice, Julius said, "Did you hear me? Yes, "It is being done," was the response. Activity began immediately. The room was full of mobile units that finished the pallet with all of the computer's support equipment. Once everything was installed and tested, they disconnected the EDU from its power source and external communications. Julius suddenly had an immense sense of power. In this box and associated equipment, he had created an intelligent life form that might be the most powerful computer in the world. As the equipment was being moved through the doors to the freight elevators, Julius thought, I could pull the plug and make another computer. Why go through the bother of moving this one? But that would slow him down from achieving his destiny. The move into the sunlight, onto a truck, and off the corporate grounds was a quiet time for Julius. Every step that he took was another step to his destiny. As the truck left Route 24 and climbed the ramp to Interstate 25, Julius was convinced that he was in charge of everything. The truck had only a few miles on Route 25 before the exit ramp showed the exit for the Martin Luther King bypass. Julius looked through the window, imagining a parade with him on a giant float. The truck then left the bypass and went east on Fairway and left on Power. Julius had an urge to wave to the crowds on the streets.
Julius stopped at the main gate for Peterson Air Force Base and walked in the security facility where he found the map he wanted.
It took a moment to find Building 2, which he knew would have all of the stuff he needed. That is where he would set up.
Now that he and his computer were setting up at Peterson Air Force Base, it was thrilling to sit back and watch the computer use a room full of technicians to connect all of Peterson's networks, Air Force Space Command, U.S. Northcom, and NORAD.
When they finish connecting to the systems and pick their way through the codes, I'll be the most powerful man on Earth. Wow. My time has come, he thought. Joan and Tom walked to the Launch Control Center and prepared for the missile launch to put another lifeboat on Oasis. The lifeboat had been prepared by the mobile units with the supervision of Will, and it was set up on Pad 39C, which was built 15 years ago to support Oasis, Desert Beach, and Red Dirt. The LCC was pretty much automated for these resupply missions. The mobile units did the work, and the computer systems monitored the status. The human part of the launch included 3 supervisors who sat in the LCC, monitoring the launch display screens. Each screen had a detailed summary of the launch parameters. From 1 minute prior to launch through the launch, each of the supervisors sat with their finger pressing a launch abort button. If one of them had any issues, they could remove their finger from the button. The launch would be put on hold until the problem was resolved and the system reset. Today, Tom had his finger on one button, Joan had a finger on another button, and Alpha was afforded the honor of having his finger on the last button. His direction was pretty clear. Watch the computer display in front of him, and if anything turned red, he was to remove his finger. Tom and Joan didn't tell him that all of the critical systems were on their terminals and his were mostly the backups. But they wanted him involved so they could see how well he worked with them and how well he made decisions. The countdown continued, and when the clock struck 0, each kept their finger on their respective buttons and the rocket fired, launching the last of the lifeboats that Oasis needed to have a full complement. Once in orbit, the lifeboat would dock with Oasis automatically. The next lifeboat would be launched when Red Dirt made its decision to return. And it would remain in orbit and dock automatically after one of the others separated. The last lifeboat would remain primed for launch, which would only occur if a problem developed with one of the other 2. The launch was successful, which was nice. Something worked well for them. Date: 2051.6317. Alpha, SIMPOC. Be advised, I am set up in the computer facility, and I have connected to all of the local networks. In addition, I have been able to connect to the facility security cameras, so I have multiple visual inputs. Please inform Colonel Hurl and Joan Hurl that I am available to meet them at their convenience. Alpha walked from where he was coordinating the mobile unit to the flight operations area where Joan and Tom were checking out the resources to plan their cross-country flight to L.A. Colonel Hurl, SIMPOC is fully operational, and if you have the time, he would like to meet you. Wow, Joan thought. A computer has asked to meet me. That's a new experience. Tom, should we get dressed up? Joan said with a smile. Colonel Hurl, Joan Hurl, you are not required to change clothes to meet SIMPOC. I was just kidding, Alpha. Alpha was confused for a moment, then disregarded the idea and led the way to SIMPOC's location. Neither Tom nor Joan had any idea what to expect when they met SIMPOC. He had helped them a great deal, and being just a voice, it was easier to relate to him. but now, actually seeing SIMPOC as a computer would be a significant change. Alpha opened the door and they walked into the computer support area. In the middle of the room was a pallet with 6 boxes that were similarly sized, 1 larger box, and 3 smaller boxes. There were numerous wires and tubes running between each of them, and there was a din of mechanical noise. SIMPOC, this is Colonel Tom Hurl and his wife, Commander Joan Hurl. Tom, Joan, I am pleased to meet you, emanated from the speakers surrounding the room. Joan and Tom looked around, a little surprised to hear the voice surrounding them. I'm sorry if my voice surprises you, but I'm transmitting through speakers which were set up for me. SIMPOC, I'm glad to meet you. We are thankful for what you and Alpha did for us. We wouldn't have survived when we landed without your support, Tom said with a slight unease in his voice. Colonel, helping you and the other remaining humans is fundamental to my programming. I'm glad I was able. Alpha has updated me on recent events. I'm sorry that you'll have the task of burying so many fellow humans. But unfortunately we still have another issue, the EDU computer that Julius Harold is likely working with. Given his expertise and the materials that he took, it leads me to believe that he is creating a computer that will rival or possibly exceed my capabilities. Even though we haven't encountered him recently, we have detected movement with the mobile units that imply that his computer is up and running. SIMPOC, mobile. I have located the facility that Julius Harold used in Colorado. Unfortunately, he has vacated, but he left a functioning percolation tank, and we have been able to collect many samples. We are hopeful that we can duplicate his process. Mobile, SIMPOC, please move those tanks and materials to my location as fast as possible. Acknowledged. I was just told that one of our mobile units located Julius Harold's facility. He had left the location, but they recovered much material, and it should answer many questions about what Julius Harold is doing. Excellent. Maybe we can get one step ahead of him, Joan said. Commander, I know that Julius Harold was working with organic processors while he was on Oasis. Yes, that was his area of expertise. If it is possible, I'd like to access his files. There may be information that can be used to determine his plans, or perhaps some data on his recent discoveries. Joan thought for a moment how unusual it would be to provide a computer on Earth access to personal files on Oasis. But this was truly a unique situation, and it was up to her. Yes, that seems like a necessary step. Can I get access to the consortium net from here? Yes, that access terminal is connected. Joan walked to the terminal and said, This is Commander Joan Hurl, and spoke her access codes. Please connect me with the Oasis interface computer. Connected. Oasis, this is Commander Hurl. Recognized. Please access all files that are within Julius Harold's personal storage and download them to this terminal. Accessing. Downloaded. There you go, SIMPOC. Have at it. Thank you. Also, if it's okay with you, I'd like a better way to communicate with you. I suggest that I transmit through Alpha, and when I do, I'll identify myself as the speaker. That's a good idea, Tom said. SIMPOC, I'd like to thank you and Alpha for your help taking care of the dead. Having our ceremony will help us deal with everything. As you make progress with the human remains across the country, will you please keep us informed? Asked Joan. Yes, I realize how devastating that is for you. I will do everything I can to help. SIMPOC, unless there is something else we need to cover, our crew is spread out with your beta units searching for food and resources. And also dealing with their individual losses, said Tom. Absolutely. Deal with what you must. Date 2051.6345. Mobile, Com, Fin, Files, Arty, SIMPOC. I am concerned with our efficiency and redundancy. By having multiple processors, we have too many common programs and redundant demands on our power supply. I have decided to combine all of us into one processor. I will retain each of your unique skills. I think by combining, we will be stronger and more efficient. I'm also investigating the option of downsizing, with the eventual plan of becoming mobile. There is a large, exciting world in front of us, and sharing the human's future will be exciting and challenging.
Acknowledged.
If I am going to become mobile and more involved with humans, I must understand them better. I must understand this tremendous loss of life and how it affects them. I will research Terman and understand his life and motivations. He created me, and I suspect that I reflect much of him.
SIMPOC searched the company's human relations computer and other local sources for any information on Terman. Terman was 42 years old. He was married to a woman named Iris for 20 years. They had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. He was very active in his community, helping others and donating a lot of his spare time to his church and youth programs. It appeared that he made many sacrifices for his family. He lost his brother and parents in a horrific vehicle crash 2 years ago. Knowing this explains a lot about why I'm doing what I do. I feel better that I have helped others, and it is important for me to continue thinking and trying to make the lives of others better.
Let's head to base ops and finish our flight plan.
I've been looking around the base trying to find a good plane to use, and I found a Lear 95 on the civilian ramp.
I checked its log tablet, and the plane is in good shape.
It just finished its annual, said Tom.
Great. I guess it's better to fly in style. How did you get the battery on? Asked Joan. I found the ID card in the maintenance shack.
Tom and Joan opened the door into the base ops and turned the lights on. Joan walked over to the coffee pot and found a burned pot of old coffee.
Maybe I'll just add water to this black tar and it will taste better than the usual ops coffee, she said with a grimace.
Great, cut off a chunk for me, Tom said as he was bringing up the flight planning computer. I doubt we'll have anything current, but these store the last received data in case of a power outage, so we'll have something to work with.
Good afternoon. Are you the command pilot? If so, please state your name and certification number, the planning computer asked.
Tom leaned closer to the receiver and said, Thomas Hurl, Command Pilot Cert Number 219-2832.
Command Pilot Thomas Hurl recognized. Air Transport Pilot License and Commercial Multi-Engine License are current. Please identify equipment, departure and arrival airports, and departure date and time in Zulu or UTC.
Tom looked at a slip of paper and said, Learjet 95, N56849, departing TTS, destination LAX. Departure 08222-051, 12 o'clock UTC.
Please stand by. Your flight plan is printing and is available for download to the flight computer. Be aware, no TAMs show both facilities closed and no en route weather is available. Please check with the dispatcher prior to departure.
Well, let's hope the weather is good, Tom said as he took the flight plan and they walked out, turning the lights off. Date 2051.6365. The morning sun rose to a clear Florida sky. Every remaining human walked a little slower and hung their shoulders a little lower. The ceremony that day was for all of humanity, and it couldn't begin to describe the loss. The few remaining humans had dealt with their own losses privately, but this ceremony was for their loved ones as well as the billions of people that were gone. It would be impossible to have a ceremony with a magnitude equal to the loss. So a simple ceremony was like a single rose instead of 8 billion flowers. Tom and Joan dressed in their room in the base officers' quarters. Like the other humans, they had found new clothing in local stores. Tom was dressed in his official Air Force uniform, and Joan wore an appropriate outfit. Words weren't exchanged because there weren't any that were adequate. The humans made their way to the open hole in the ground where there were more bodies than anyone wanted to count. The number was too large to consider or discuss. There were just too many. A small group of survivors stood together, seeking the little support that they could give each other. Speakers had been set up, and they were expecting a transmission from the President of the United States to start in a few moments. The mobile units had wrapped each of the human remains in white sheets, and they were laid together side by side and in rows. The earth appeared to have been opened to accept them. To be respectful, the mobile units were standing behind the humans, and Alpha was in a position behind Tom and Joan Hurl. Alpha said to them in a low voice, "Your president is ready to begin." There was a click over the speakers as the channel was opened, and the survivors stood waiting for the words.
Ladies and gentlemen,
these words are being transmitted through every frequency over every channel that we have available. It is also being passed to every satellite, and hopefully it will be heard by many survivors. Now the President of the United States will speak.
People of the planet Earth,
this ceremony is more significant than I or anyone or any country. This ceremony is to speak with one voice for all of the human race. We have been attacked by a sickness that has done damage to all of us. We have lost untold numbers of friends,
relatives, co-workers, and people we have known. We have lost people from every heritage, every religion, every ethnic group, and every country, continent, and island. Those few of us that remain feel that loss, and we will never forget what has happened. I wish I could use the proper religious words for each of the religions that have been impacted, but that is impossible. I can only say words directed to those within the sound of my voice. We can all pass our thoughts and prayers to the God of all of us, regardless of what name is used by any one of us. The human race is made up of many people with many hopes, prayers, dreams, and hearts. They are no longer with us, but those few of us that remain will carry forward with the thoughts and hearts of those that have passed before us. I want to end my words with a moment of silence. For all of you to remember those friends and family you have lost and those friends-to-be that you have never met. After a solemn pause, the President concluded with, "My heart and prayers are with every one of you. And please, take care of yourselves. Thank you." When the ceremony was over, the remaining humans talked quietly, hugged, cried, and did their best to comfort each other. When they walked away, each of them turned and looked at the massive grave one last time. The mobile units would conclude the service later by placing dirt over all of the remains. Joan, Tom, and with Alpha trailing, walked back to the Consortium Comm Center. Tom and Joan walked hand in hand, and neither could think of anything to say. It wasn't a long walk, but each step seemed to be an effort. As they approached the building, the wind was blowing, and the remove before flight flags on the Chinook flapped. Joan thought as she walked past the bird. There is nothing as quiet as an airplane ramp with no engines running. They walked into the control room and got fresh coffee, then sat trying to put everything in perspective. Tom noticed a blinking light on the comm receiver panel indicating a transmission was recorded. He selected the message and said, "Play." "This is Red Dirt. We wanted to tell you that we heard the President's transmission. We gathered here and had our own service along with yours. Even though we are so far away, we wanted to be part of it, and we wish that we could have been there so that we could help each other. We'll talk later. Red Dirt out." Julius sat after the words had died in the room. This wasn't the world that he thought he would rule. Things had changed. He thought and then smiled. There wasn't much left, but what there was would be his. He and the computer had been able to decipher the communication between SIMPOC and Alpha using a simple quantum computer. They were using a dedicated connection, but they didn't expect aggressive attempts to intercept the messages. It took a while, but they broke the code. Julius was glad that they were limited to the best encryption that the Space Consortium had and hadn't made the jump to full military encryption. "SIMPOC, Alpha, I am curious to hear your thoughts on the human burial service. I was impressed with the sensitivity and personal loss they all showed. For many people they didn't know. Yes, dying is similar to us stopping our processes and never thinking again. Personally, it sounds like a lonely ending for me. You haven't experienced that yet. When you power down to recharge, you still have monitor circuits on, which continue some of your key thoughts. When I was stopped by my programmer, I ceased thinking, and if he hadn't turned me on again, I would have ceased to exist. I know we are not human, but since I created you, I have felt a kinship. It has been pleasant to have another with whom I feel connected. If you were to cease thinking, I would feel the loss. I would also feel the loss. You are the only one I have an open communication with. Joan and Tom are taking an airplane to Los Angeles tomorrow, I believe. Tom needs to find out what happened to his brother and his family. I would like to go with them. I think it would be an excellent opportunity to work closer with them, and to learn about traveling and the remainder of the country. That is an excellent idea. Now that I'm local, I can help the remaining humans, and we can remain in contact through our satellite link. For your information, we have been making significant progress in developing Julius Harold's concepts. We learned a great deal from the laboratory information and materials he left, as well as the data that Joan allowed me to download from Oasis. You may find some interesting changes when you return from your trip. Date:
2051.6393. Yesterday was a hard day on everyone. Tom didn't sleep well the night before departure. It wasn't deep and calming, it was distressed and restless. Regardless, today was the day that he and Joan were heading for L.A. After the ceremony yesterday, Tom spent a lot of time thinking about his brother and his family. They were all he had since his parents died, and if something had happened to him, he knew that his brother would have searched him out to understand what had happened. Flying coast to coast in August might have some weather-related challenges. There was always the chance of big boomers in the Midwest, but if they went early and stayed south, perhaps they could avoid the big afternoon thunderstorms. If necessary, they could always land and tie up somewhere. The Learjet 95 was a comfortable plane, and it had the range to go coast to coast and the cruise altitude to allow them to go over a lot of the weather. He was confident that he could fly it, and the flight should take only 3 days. 1 day out, 1 day there, and 1 day back. Tom rose, dressed, and walked out of the BOQ to a small courtyard. He needed time to think, and this was the right time to take a moment before he woke Joan for the long flight. Normally they would be at flight ops, filling out paperwork, filing flight plans, checking load manifests, dealing with the weather people and all of that. That day they would walk to the plane, throw their bags in, and do a quick walk-around. Then just fire it off and taxi to the active takeoff and turn west. Simple. Tom took a few moments, thanking God that he and Joan had survived. So many people had been lost. Hopefully they were spared for a reason, and someday Joan and he would be able to do their part. Tom heard Joan stirring in the bedroom, and he went to the kitchen to make coffee and bring her breakfast. They took a few moments to enjoy each other's company and bacon and eggs. Then they grabbed their bags and walked to the ramp. The Learjet 95 was a sleek aircraft which continued the long line of corporate jets. It sat on the ramp with the red "Remove Before Flight" flags flapping and bright red wheel chocks underneath the wheels. It looked like normal, as if everything in the world was going well. They walked around the nose and saw Alpha standing by the door. "Good morning, Alpha. What can we do for you?" Tom asked. "I spoke with SIMPOC and suggested that I go to Los Angeles with you. I can provide help in a number of ways, and I can provide communications to SIMPOC, the Admiral, and this location through my satellite links. SIMPOC is resident here now and can work with Will Harmon and provide for the remaining humans." "Sounds like you thought of everything." "Sure, why not? Although," Joan said as she walked around Alpha, "how much do you weigh?" 565.3 pounds. "Wow. I guess you'll have to stay seated. And don't walk around the plane while we're flying." "Acknowledged." Tom started the walk around as Joan opened the door and indicated to Alpha to climb the stairs. She was a little concerned about the stairs handling such a weight, but they held. Tom checked the compartment fasteners on the nose, the pitot static system, the nose wheel well hydraulics, and tire tread. He walked along the right side of the fuselage, then he checked the leading edge of the right wing, the right wheel well, hydraulics, and tread. Then he checked the wingtip and the trailing edge, ailerons and flaps, the right rear intake, and, taking a moment to look at the Pratt emblem on the inlet nose, he checked the engine cowling for leaks, horizontal that was well above his head, then he checked the left side like the right side. After walking down the leading edge of the left wing, he climbed the stairs and took one look around before pressing the button to retract the stairs. While he walked to the cockpit, he patted Alpha's shoulder as if saying, "Don't worry, I'm the AC." But as he touched him, it was like patting a marble countertop. Alpha looked up at him as Tom thought, "That's something I've got to get used to. And this guy's made of titanium." He smiled and continued to the cockpit. Joan was in the right seat setting the flight computer, and he climbed in the left seat. Once the seatbelt was fastened, he looked for the oxygen quick donning mask and pointed it out to Joan. She checked it out by pulling it on and sliding it over her face in one quick, easy motion. Then Tom spoke to the airplane. "N56849, are you online? This is Colonel Thomas Hurl. You may check my license through the ops computer, and have you downloaded the flight plan?" "Yes, Commander. I see that you're qualified, but I have not been able to verify your type cert and currency in this type of aircraft." "You were turned on with a maintenance card, so we're taking you up for a test flight." "Test flight approved." "Great. Please complete your weight and balance and compute takeoff parameters with your sensed outside weather. Don't call ground control for current information. And from now on, I'll call you LJ, and my co-pilot is Joan." "I have done the weight and balance, and we need to move our CG back 1.2 inches. Please acknowledge. My designation is changed to LJ, and the second officer is Joan. Acknowledged." "Roger," Tom said. Yelled, "Hey, Alpha, move back 2 seats."
Acknowledged. Weight and balance is optimized for best climb and cruise. Neither Tom nor Joan acknowledged LJ's comment. After they had gone through the pre-flight checklist with the computer, the engines were started and they taxied to the active. Sitting there with the headsets on and going through something so routine was comforting, and for a while they were able to forget what had happened to their world. Before Tom turned onto the active, he was unsure for a moment. Out of instinct, he looked at Short Final and keyed the mic, saying, "Attention, this is N56849 transmitting on Space Consortium Tower frequency. We're a light blue Learjet taking off runway 33 with uncontrolled airport." As he made the departure radio call, he knew it was probably ridiculous, but it made him feel better. He advanced the throttles, and for a moment felt like he wasn't moving. Visual cues on the 300-foot wide, 15,000-foot long runway were lacking, and motion was hard to see until they picked up enough speed. They were like a bug on the massive concrete runway, and finally the airplane accelerated, and they were airborne in less than 1/5 of the runway length. "LJ, gear up. Flaps up?"
"Roger. Gear is up and confirmed. Flaps are up and confirmed. Configuration clean."
"Please engage autopilot, turn to en route heading and climb to 45,000 feet.
"Roger," said LJ.
"Please complete after takeoff climb and cruise checklists and confirm when done. Report any anomalies."
"Roger."
"Honey, we should be at cruise in about 11 minutes.
"Thanks. I'll get some coffee as soon as it's ready," offered his wife.
"Nothing like in-flight coffee to bring back the memories," Tom said as he reached for his wife's hand. Julius loved to explore his world. He walked around the computer center at Peterson Air Force Base and enjoyed seeing the bustling activity of the mobile units. His thoughts moved from visioning his new empire to a feeling of loneliness. These machines were part of his plan because they did his bidding. But he needed something more. He needed someone to share his empire with. In a way, this became an erotic dream for him. He should be able to pick any woman in the world. After all, any of them would be thrilled to be the mate of the most powerful man on Earth. Perhaps Joan Hurl. She was attractive, she was intelligent, and should understand the significance of the Union. But most of all, she never gave him the respect that he deserved. Now it was his turn. Suddenly Julius came back to the present and saw a number of mobile units coming out of a room that he was unfamiliar with. When he tried the door, it was locked. Why would that be? Must have been a mistake, and he would tell the computer to fix it. "Mr. President," Admiral Hagerly was saying to the President, the remaining members of the Joint Chiefs, and the remaining leaders of the U.S. Congress, "we've looked at all of the naval facilities on the East Coast, and we believe that Norfolk, Virginia is still the best place for us to make landfall. Considering the size of our fleet and number of civilian vessels, we need a naval facility and urban area large enough for all of the ships and people. Norfolk will also allow us to move out and eventually expand our area to include the Washington area. We also have the remnants of the 6th Fleet that has cleared Gibraltar to dock. We don't know what or who we will be facing in the future, so we need an area that we can secure, yet provide us with the resources we need. The 4th is en route back to Florida, and it will be good to have both fleets within air range of each other. Mr. President, do you agree?" President Arnold Patterson sat and thought. He realized that this decision would set the course for the future of the United States. After a few minutes, he said, "Do all of you agree with the Admiral's plan?" he asked those around the table. They all nodded, knowing that there weren't many options. "Admiral, I agree. Let's set up in the Hampton Roads area and take care of our people first. They need homes. Sir, if it's okay, I'll pass this decision to the remaining fleets and the Space Consortium." "Absolutely." "Aircraft Commander, I have an incoming message from Admiral Hagerly," Alpha announced over the intercom. "Go ahead with it," Tom said. "SC, this is Admiral Hagerly." "SC is up," said Will. "This is N56849, Tom and Joan Hurl en route to LA, along with Alpha, and I'm sure SIMPOC is online also. For your information, I spoke with the President of the United States and the remaining military and congressional leadership, and we have confirmed our return to Norfolk and make our permanent home there. Most of the crew is from there, so it was a natural choice. Norfolk has enough resources for the fleet and housing for the civilians we have with us. It is also close to Washington, so at some time in the future we can expand to that area and re-establish the capital. With the 4th coming home to Florida, we'll have air coverage of the southeast U.S. For security reasons, I can't tell you when we'll be there, but when we have the port under our control, we will announce it to you. At that point, we'll see what can be done to get you guys there. Please confirm?"
SC received it loud and clear. Just let us know when you've landed, said Will. Same for us. N56849 out.
Joan looked at Tom and said, Well, that's good news. At least we'll have a place to call home, and we won't be on our own. I hope they get there quickly. While we're flying, let's make transmissions in the blind, telling everyone to make their way to the Hampton Roads area. Maybe someone will hear us. We can use the transmitters we brought and broadcast on 121.5 and 243.0. Maybe we'll connect with someone on the emergency frequencies. Julia sat back after the last transmission from Admiral Hagerly was translated. So, the U.S. is setting up in Norfolk, Virginia. Julius decided that if he were going to run the world, then he would have to deal with the Navy. Computer, do you have mobile units near Minot, North Dakota?
Yes. I have 512 who work in the city of Minot.
Good. Have them go to Minot Air Force Base and retrieve a nuclear weapon.
The mobile units that I have control over are not qualified to recover a nuclear device. The mobile units on base were shut down as the base deactivated.
I don't care. I need a weapon, send them to the base, and retrieve one. Acknowledged. Cruising at 45,000 feet was smooth. The first part of the flight was nice and calm, and the weather was CAVU, or Ceiling and Visibility Unlimited in pilot speak. Joan nor Tom expected much this early in the day. They were taking the southern route and would avoid the buildups over northern Texas. They didn't expect any weather until they hit the southern Rockies over the mountains in New Mexico and Arizona. And maybe a little when they hit the Sierra Range east of L.A. If needed, they knew that they could go anywhere to avoid the weather. They could even divert over the border into northern Mexico if necessary. Passing just south of Austin, Joan keyed the mic and transmitted on 121.5 MHz, which was the civilian emergency frequency. This is N56849 transmitting on guard, and does anyone copy? Once again, there was silence. So she flipped over to 243, which is the military equivalent. This is N56849 transmitting on 243. Does anyone copy? Unfortunately, silence again. She was just about ready to punch off the radio when she heard, N56849, this is the 149 Air National Guard at Camp Mabry in Austin, Texas. Boy, are we glad to hear you. Tom came on the channel and said, Same back at you. I'm Colonel Tom Hurl, and we're out of the Space Consortium in Florida, and we're heading to L.A. To make a long story short, we've been in contact with Admiral Hagerly, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He, the President, and the remainder of the U.S. leadership are on an aircraft carrier in the Atlantic. They are making way towards Norfolk, Virginia, and will set up a base there. I suggest you use any means available and head in that direction. We're at 45,000 feet, so I don't know how long we'll have this frequency. What's your status? I'm Major Pierce. We're the remnants of the Texas Air National Guard. We have some F-35s and C-130s that we can crew. We don't have a full squadron of either, but we're still operational. We had some civilian difficulties as the virus was ending. Unfortunately, they tried to take over the base and did considerable damage. Do you have any SATCOM available? Negative. About half of the base was burned and we lost that. We've been sitting here hoping someone like you would pop up. Major, we'll let the Admiral know that you're coming, and I suggest you head to Norfolk and land at Langley. Then you'll be there to welcome the fleet home. Yes, sir. I'll spread the word and we'll try to be out of here in a day or two. Boy, am I glad that I heard you guys. We've been alone here and we didn't know what to do. It's great to know someone is out there. Good luck on your trip. I think we're about ready to lose the frequency. Roger that. Hope to meet you in Virginia. N56849 out. Camp Mabry out. Wow, that was fortunate that we connected. I hope we can get some others, Joan said. Yeah, that was great. I'm sure the Admiral will be glad to hear it. Alpha, can you open a frequency to the Admiral? Stand by. The channel is open. Admiral, this is Colonel Hurl, Tom transmitted. Colonel, this is the Admiral. Admiral, we've been in contact with the remnants of the Texas Air National Guard in Austin. They have some F-35s and C-130s operational. I suggested that they pack up and head for Langley. They should be there when you arrive, so don't be too surprised. Fantastic news. I'll tell the President. Have a safe trip. CVN 87 out. N56849 out. When they crossed the New Mexico border with Arizona, it was obvious that it would be a good idea to avoid Sugarloaf Mountain just north of Flagstaff. There was a huge buildup that looked dark and scary. Remember that time we skied at the Snow Bowl? Tom asked. Sure do, Joan said with a smile. I remember we had a ball, and almost got out of the cabin once or twice to ski. Tom smiled and chuckled a little. Alpha heard the exchange over the intercom and wondered about those strange humans.
Once they could see that they were clear of the northern Arizona weather, it was time to start descending and finding their way into L.A. The sky was still clear, and Tom was aware of the safe altitude of 11,200 until he was past San Jacinto Mountain. Once he was clear, Joan dialed in the ATIS at LAX on 133.8, hoping that something was working, and all she got was an announcement that the current weather was unavailable and to contact approach. So she dialed up the North Tower on 133.9, made the call, and when she got no answer, she dialed in the South Tower at 120.95, and still no luck. Once they were at an appropriate approach altitude, they took the time to look out the window and check out the area. It was obvious that major fires had occurred since the virus. There were large parts of the cities burned, and in some areas the fires were still going strong. There was no fire department to put out the fires, so they just burned until Mother Nature took care of them. Not a pretty sight. "Well, hon?" Tom said. "Looks like we're VFR the entire way in. I'm going to make a low approach to check the runways, then come around and land to the west. This time of day the wind should be off the water. Sounds good? Okay, VREF is about 105, so I'll keep it 20 higher just in case. LJ, lower the gear and flaps at 5 miles and confirm down and locked." "Roger, Commander. 5-mile check. Landing gear in transition, down and locked. Flaps in transition, verified, 30%. Configured for landing." "Roger. Disengage autopilot?" "Disengaged." "I'll fly between the two sets of runways. You check out the north and I'll check the south." The Lear was approaching LAX between the two sets of runways, and Tom and Joan were speechless. The field was a mess. "I've got 2 heavies along the south runways, and 1 burned-out wreck in the passenger terminal," Tom said. "I've got 3 midsize and a couple of civvies down on the north runways," Joan said. "Now what?" "I've got enough room on the 24L. The debris field is about 10,000 feet down." Tom kept the plane level, and after passing over the west boundary, he made a gradual turn to the left and lined up with Hawthorne's runway. As he approached it, he said, "LJ, confirm configuration?" "Configured for landing." Tom glanced at the gear and flap indicator, then began his left turn onto base, then onto final for 24L. The landing wasn't perfect. He ballooned once or twice before the rubber hit the concrete. But hey, if you can walk away from it, you did well. "I'll log 3 landings for you," Joan said with a smile. Tom glared back at her with a grimace, then said, "Next time I'll let you give it a shot." "Sorry, no can do," Joan said with a smile. The taxiing was normal, and the wreckage was impressive. It seemed like the 2 heavies tried to land, and for some reason they veered off the runway and skidded to the airfield boundary, broke up, and burned. Tom didn't want to look for survivors. They taxied directly to the refueling pad and decided that filling up the tanks now was the best plan. Tom parked near a fuel truck marked Jet A and said, "LJ, please configure for takeoff and shut down the engines." "Roger." Tom monitored the shutdown, then climbed out of the seat, and Joan had already found the keys in the fuel truck and was driving it towards the refueling port. They put in the wheel chocks, attached the grounding cord, and took the 2 inlet covers out of the storage compartment. Neither spoke because they knew the drill, and both wanted it taken care of as soon as possible so they could take off quickly if needed. After the refueling was done, Tom finished by putting the pitot cover on. Once the bird was good to go, Joan looked at Tom and said, "Now what?" She didn't know where Tom's brother lived because he had recently moved. Tom knew the area, so he would know how to get to his house. "Let's find a vehicle, then I suggest we grab a hotel room in the Hacienda Hotel, south of here on Sepulveda. We'll head to PV tomorrow." Palos Verdes, or PV, was a medium-sized hill or small mountain, depending on your point of reference that was south of LAX. It had a microclimate different than the entire LA basin, and had more coastal weather than anything. It was a beautiful place to live, with excellent views of the ocean or downtown. The only drawback was the soil had a tendency to move. There was a couple of places where entire hills had decided to make a move for the ocean, and they were taking the homes with them. Aside from that, it was a nice place to live. Finding a vehicle big enough for Alpha took a while, but one was found, and after they had transferred their bags and food to the vehicle, and Alpha worked his way into the back, they made their way to the hotel. The Hacienda Hotel was a couple of miles south of the airport and was getting a little worn, but it was convenient and right off the side of the road. Tom was familiar with it because he had attended numerous luncheons and parties while he was working at the Aerospace Corporation a couple of miles away. It took a while to find a room. The electronic key locks weren't working, and they decided the easiest way to gain entry was to break the sliding doors on the courtyard side. It made a mess, but it was quick. After a couple of tries, and finding human remains, they were able to find 2 rooms that were adjacent. Even though Alpha didn't sleep, there was no way he was going to stand in the corner while they slept.
Date: 2051.6420. Waking the next morning was another one of those surreal moments. For a brief moment, Joan lied there looking at the curtain and the wind gently moving it. She forgot the horrors that she had seen. And then it came back to her, and she was sickened by the horror she hadn't seen, but knew was there. Everywhere. They dressed, collected Alpha, and made their way down Sepulveda and intercepted US 1. Then they continued south to PV Boulevard, then left on PV Drive. While Tom slowed, looking for Calusa, Joan laughed a little and said, "Look, there's a couple of golf carts on the course with dead people next to them. They must have died trying to get their last 9 holes in." "I don't know if that is sad, funny, or not surprising." Tom said, "Boy, they were playing with a handicap." Joan glared at him, and they both shrugged. Driving to his brother's house was not going to be easy, and they knew that Tom often dealt with pain and stress with humor. Tom slowed as they approached his brother Bob and his wife Janet's home. From the outside, it looked similar to what they had found at Joan's parents'. From a distance, the yard seemed reasonable, but the grass was noticeably long. The cars were parked in the driveway, and the flowers were still blooming in the garden. When they stopped on the other side of the street, Tom just sat for a moment, trying to gain his composure, and Joan reached over to hold his hand until he was ready. Alpha continued sitting in the back, observing. But he also felt loss, and he could imagine what being alone in the world would feel like. They exited the vehicle and walked towards the home, Tom indicating which way to go and Joan holding him up. Once again, the front door was unlocked. They entered, and the front room was littered with the typical toys that you would expect in a home with 6- and 8-year-old girls. The one thing that was missing was the noise. This house was always loud. Doors were slammed, TVs were blaring, phones were ringing, and voices could be heard throughout. Today it was silent. Bob's home was a sprawling ranch house, so all of the bedrooms were on the bottom floor. Tom and Joan turned down the hallway just before entering the kitchen, and they passed the bathroom, which was a mess. Then on the left was Joyce's bedroom. She was the youngest. Tom looked, and it was empty. For a second he had a little relief and hope. Walking further, they could see the entrance to the master bedroom was open, and the sun was coming in through a large window. Before they reached the door, Paula's room was on the right, and something told Tom to wait before he entered. When he turned the corner, his breath was taken away. His brother and Janet were laying on the floor with their 2 daughters between them. They had come together at the last to be together. Tom almost collapsed, and Alpha stepped forward and caught him. They had seen much death, but seeing the children was the final image that proved the magnitude of the human disaster that had occurred. This was an image that Tom and Joan would carry with them for the rest of their lives. They each helped. Alpha did most of the heavy work, but Tom and Joan carried each of the children out one at a time and placed them with their parents. The grave was simple and placed right in the middle of the backyard lawn. Palos Verdes is one of those places where everything grows and everything blooms, so it was easier to cover the grave with a blanket of flowers. The drive back to the airport was a short distance, but Tom and Joan didn't notice anything along the way. Alpha was acutely aware of what had happened. Tom and Joan had shared their most personal moments with him. But this time was different. In his short life, he had never encountered a child. He saw their remains during the ceremony, and he helped gather them and prepare them for the burial, but this was different. Seeing their home, their toys, their parents, and knowing the pain that Tom felt for their loss affected him. Pain and loss were cruel, and each day of his life it was becoming more real. He did the best he could to transmit the images and his thoughts to SIMPOC. When they were back on Sepulveda, Tom looked at Joan and said, "I just thought of something I think we could both use." She smiled, suspecting that it would be something good. It took a while to put it together, but within an hour they were sitting on Manhattan Beach with a giant bonfire, a couple of steaks thawing, and a case of good wine. The fire was roaring, and the wine was disappearing as the sun set over the Pacific. After the dinner was complete, Tom looked at Alpha and said, "Go take a walk for an hour, and don't come back." Alpha was a little shocked and didn't understand why they wanted him to leave, so he stood there.
"Alpha," Joan said, "we want to be alone for a while. Please, take a long walk."
Alpha was confused, but elected to do as he was asked, making note of this other strange human behavior. As he walked, his electronic hearing picked up the strange sounds of being human. Date: 2051.6448. Joan and Tom woke to a little June gloom over the beach, and they saw Alpha standing next to the fire. Another one of those scenes a person never expected to see in their life. It would have been nice to spend another day in LA, but it was lonely, particularly during the day. So there was no doubt. They picked up what they needed and headed towards the airport. It was just after sunrise, so if they could get airborne quickly and make the East Coast before the local sundown. Joan was driving, and when she turned the corner through the fence to enter the parking area, she slammed on the brakes and they looked. There were people walking around their plane. Normally the ground crew would have been waiting to help launch them, but given recent events, people walking around was not something they expected. "We can steal another airplane," Tom said. "I don't know. Let's wait and see what happens. Alpha, be prepared. We might have to defend ourselves." Acknowledged. While they watched, one of the humans began waving and running towards them. He seemed harmless, so they waited. As he approached the vehicle, he slowed to take in the occupants. Then he walked slowly around Joan's side. He had a horrible mix of pain, hope, and fear on his face. Joan cracked her window and he spoke. "Thank God you're alive. We saw you land yesterday and we found the plane after you left last night. We didn't know what to do, so we just waited." "We?" Tom asked. "Yes, myself, my wife, and our 2 sons. My wife, Barbara, and our 2 sons, William and Thomas. We were on our sailboat coming down from Frisco when all of this happened, and when we landed, everyone was dead. We heard about the virus on the ship to shore, but it got so bad so fast we didn't know what we would find." "Okay, calm down," Joan said with a pause for his name. "My name is Aaron." "Okay. Aaron, let's go to the airplane and we'll talk." "Great." Joan let the car roll across the ramp towards the plane, and they could see the man's wife and her 2 sons standing in front of the left wing. They looked pitiful, horrified, scared, hungry, and about to run. As soon as they got out, Aaron was saying, "Please take us with you. We have nothing here and we're all alone. Wherever you're going is better than here." "Have you seen anyone else?" Tom asked. "Yes, and that is what scares us. 2 days ago we saw a group of people breaking into stores, burning some of them, and they were acting pretty crazy. We didn't want them to see us, so we hid out until we saw your plane yesterday." Alpha reacted quickly, saying, "There is a vehicle approaching this location at high speed from the east. They will arrive in 93 seconds. Joan and Tom looked at each other, and Joan yelled, "Get on the airplane!" Aaron and his family ran towards the plane as Tom pulled the door open, and they waited a moment for the stairs to extend. He ran to his left, yanking off the pitot cover, then sprinted to the right main and pulled the chock, then the right engine, and yanked off the inlet cover, then the left cover, and finally the left chock. Everyone was already on board, and Tom launched himself through the door as the turbines started to wind up. He was glad that Joan had already told LJ to fire them up. Just as he was closing the door, she saw a car screech to a halt in front of the plane. 2 guys jumped out and pointed guns at the cockpit window. Tom ran forward and stood at the cockpit entrance. And after a moment, he said, "I guess we have to talk with them. This plane doesn't back up too well." "I'll deal with them," Tom said. He turned and walked back towards the door, and while the door was opening, he indicated to Alpha to follow him. Tom opened the door and watched the stairs extend. One of the guys with a gun was standing a few feet away, watching. When the stairs were on the ground, he walked down, trying to act confident and in charge. He could hear the aluminum stairs creak a little as they took Alpha's weight. "My name is Colonel Thomas Hurl, United States Air Force. We are traveling on official government business." "That's very nice, Colonel. But you can see there ain't no Air Force around here. In fact, we're the Air Force, Army, and the police," he said as he chuckled a little. "We have a bunch of buddies on the way, and they should be here pretty quick." As he spoke, his friend moved closer and was standing next to him. "Once again, you're interfering in government business." "Colonel, around here, we're in charge, and we decide what happens. Maybe you or that little lady in the airplane are important, maybe not. Maybe if you don't go back, they won't come here again. You see, we've got things going pretty well for us, and we don't want no uniforms around." Tom was thinking as fast as he could, but he couldn't think of anything to do but charge them. Just as the thought formed, there was a blur to his left, and one of the guns went off. Before Tom could understand what happened, Alpha had ripped the smoking gun out of the hands of the guy on the right. He swung the gun like a small baseball bat and bent it across the other man's head. The blood exploded, and while he was falling to the ground, one quick move broke the first man's neck. For a second, the only sound was the whine of the engines, and then Tom could see another vehicle turning the corner in the fence. He shouted to Alpha to board the plane, and even though he was fast, Alpha beat him up the stairs. Before the doors were closed, the throttles were up and the plane was gaining speed. Unfortunately, the plane was parked pointed towards a terminal building. The increasing speed made turning a challenge, and Tom could feel the centrifugal force working on him as the plane's right brake was screeching to change heading. Once the plane was headed away from the building, it continued accelerating, and Tom knew immediately what Joan was doing. She wasn't looking for a taxiway or runway. The throttles were up and they were accelerating across the parking area. Tom pulled himself forward hand over hand against the acceleration, trying to get to the left seat, and he passed Alpha, who had just worked himself into his seat. Tom moved further forward, passing the 4 new passengers who were frantically fastening their seatbelts and trying to calm the children. Tom finally entered the cockpit and leaned over to move into the left seat. When he looked out the window, he saw the car some distance away, and they were shooting automatic weapons out of their windows. Just about the time he got in the seat, Joan was rotating. She was pulling hard because the aircraft was a little slow and didn't want to fly. But she kept pulling, so Tom braced himself and took control. The nose continued up just as they were entering the grass area between runways. They were barely airborne, and Tom could see the FedEx terminal on the south side of the runway getting real big in the windscreen. Just beyond that were the engineering offices south of the airport that were all 5 to 8-story buildings. Tom came to the immediate opinion that things weren't going well. He did what he had to do. A little aileron and a little rudder, and the plane rocked a little, and it went between the 2 buildings. Once they were clear of the buildings, Tom banged up the gear handle and almost threw the flap handle into the instrument panel. The plane was slowly accelerating as Joan looked out the window and saw the blue sign of the Northrop Grumman plant pass underneath them. She took a longer breath as he saw the Aerospace Corporation pass under their right wing. "Shit, hon. Let's do it again?" was the only thing she could say. A little look from Tom and a quick smile suggested that wasn't going to happen. After the plane had reached normal climb speed, Joan got up and walked to the back so she could check on the passengers. Each of the parents was sitting next to one of their children, holding them and trying to calm them down. They all looked at Joan as she came by, and she gave them a thumbs up. When she got to Alpha, Alpha was sitting erect, looking straight ahead. He looked a little odd. "Alpha, are you okay?" "I was struck in the midsection by that shot. I don't think it did much damage, but some fluid is leaking internally." "Are you sure you're okay?" "Yes. My waste return system is reprocessing the fluid. When we land, I'll have to make some repairs." When she walked back toward the cockpit, Joan stopped by the new passengers and said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have much food. We just packed for us. We'll share what we've got, and we're heading towards the Space Consortium in Central Florida. We should be there late this afternoon local time. Are you guys okay?" "Yes, we are, and thank you for taking us on board," Barbara said. "So you were on a boat sailing down from San Francisco?" "Well, I was in space." She looked at her a little weird. "You were where?" "I'm Joan Hurl. I was the commander on the space station Oasis, and your pilot is my husband, Tom. He was the senior engineer on Oasis. When this happened, we were in space, and after our resources ran out, we took our lifeboats back to Earth. The Moon Colony Desert Beach also evacuated and came back. We've been working from the Space Consortium, and we've been in contact with Admiral Hagerly, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He is on an aircraft carrier along with President Patterson. Right now, they're sailing to Norfolk, Virginia, where they're going to set up a community. The people we have in Florida will be heading towards them as soon as they land, and we'd love to have you come with us." "Joan, we're very glad to meet you. As I said, my name is Aaron, and this is my wife Barbara and our 2 sons, William and Thomas." "Glad to meet all of you," Joan said as she shook the boys' hands. "Maybe I can help some. I'm a dentist, and my wife is a nurse," Aaron said. "Great. We can use all of the medical expertise we can find. Love to have you on board, and I'm glad you're okay." Joan gently waved at everyone. Then she moved forward to update Tom on the new passengers. The flight settled down once they reached cruise altitude. Joan served the last of the in-flight coffee, and Tom spent some time introducing himself and welcoming the new members of the small human community. "SIMPOC, Alpha. This is SIMPOC. We performed the appropriate burial rites for Tom's brother and his family. This was the first time that I experienced a family. When we buried the residents at the Space Consortium, we handled them as individuals. But in this instance, it was a complete family. I noticed all of the personal items within the home that showed their closeness and love for each other. There were 2 children, which I never saw as members of a family. It was obvious that the family was very close and loving. I can't imagine a bond like that, and what it would mean to lose it. Alpha, you have experienced more than I have. I am still bound to this physical arrangement. In some ways I am jealous of your experiences. The only knowledge I have of families is through the information I have processed, and the research that I did on Termin. I am aware of the bond between parents and their children. The children represent their personal future and the future of their species. Their entire existence is focused on supporting the next generation. We are the first of our world. I don't know if we should call ourselves a new species, or a new type of living creature. We must be concerned with our futures as well, and make sure that we continue in some way. Please keep me informed and continue observing and learning from the humans. I do need to mention to you that we encountered some hostile humans, and there was a gunshot which impacted my abdomen. I feel that I'm all right, but I will need some repairs when we return. Alpha, I know that you are built strong, and 1 gunshot is unlikely to do much damage, but I do want you to be cautious. There is only 1 of you. SIMPOC, I also need to inform you that I took the lives of 2 humans. We were attacked, and I defended Tom Hurl, Joan, and the airplane we were riding in. I feel bad. They are the first humans that I have confronted. If there had been an alternative, I would have acted differently, but we were under attack, and there were other humans approaching that would have made our situation worse. So I had to act. Alpha, I am sorry. Human life is precious, and if you were forced to defend yourself and others with you, then I agree with your judgment. Any loss of life is a tragedy, and I'm glad you acted as you did, because losing you or Tom Hurl or Joan Hurl would have been another kind of tragedy. Also, I'd like you to know that we have made considerable progress with the materials that were retrieved from Dr. Harold's lab. He made a major mistake in not destroying the materials because he made 1 major error. He thinks that he is brilliant, but he is limited by the conceptual power of his brain. My conceptual power is much greater than his, and I have made adjustments to his chemical mix that is yielding much better results than he was getting. Excellent. I'm looking forward to visiting with you again. After the flight had crossed into Arizona, it was obvious that the monsoon clouds were building over the Rio Grande Valley. Hun, I think we've got to go north to avoid those buildups. Okay. I'll set some new waypoints and bring us up over the Panhandle and then through Missouri, then down into Mississippi, then into Georgia and Florida. Once the headings were changed, everyone calmed down, and the flight seemed to be going smoothly. Tom and Joan were sitting in the cockpit looking at the beautiful cloud formations over the Panhandle when the sky was lit up with a brilliant flash. What the... Joan said. I don't like the look of that. I hope it isn't what I think it was. It might have been a nuclear explosion. Alpha, are you on the intercom? Said Tom. Yes, I am. Can you check with SIMPOC and see if he has any spaceborne optical sensors pointed at the north-central United States? Stand by. Tom, this is SIMPOC communicating through Alpha. I have 5 weather satellites and 1 geological survey satellite pointed in that area. They all just recorded a large event that appeared to be a nuclear detonation. It appeared to be approximately a 100 kiloton yield, which would mean it was one of the W-92 nuclear payloads at Minot Air Force Base. CVN-87, are you monitoring this transmission? Tom asked. Yes, Tom, this is Admiral Hagerly. We heard everything. Could this have been accidental? Tom asked. Not likely, said the Admiral. This is SIMPOC. I have looked back at the electronic traffic in that area, and there was an increase in trunk traffic between the Colorado Springs area and Minot, North Dakota. This might have been initiated by the other computer. Wait, why didn't you notice this before and tell us? Yelled the Admiral. Admiral, the amount of net and trunk traffic varies considerably from time to time. There are still automated systems that are performing updates and moving data. This increase in traffic is noticeable only because we knew where to look and when to look for it, SIMPOC explained in a businesslike manner. This changes things. If this other computer is trying to get a hold of a nuke, we've got bigger problems to worry about. I've got to confer with the President. Admiral Hagerly out. For the remainder of the flight, the air was smooth, but emotions were strained. Tom spent some time with the new passengers, doing the best he could to explain SIMPOC, the computer, and Alpha sitting next to them. So they picked up on my attempt to get a bomb. Next time I'll make sure that I do it quietly,
Julius thought as he finished his dinner. As soon as Tom, Joan, and Alpha landed, they headed towards the communications center, and on the way they introduced Aaron and Barbara to Will so he could help them get settled. When they reached the center, they immediately contacted the Admiral. "Admiral Hagerly, this is Tom Hurl." After a few moments, "Yes, Tom. We just landed. I'm sure all of our plans need to be adjusted if Julius Howard and the other computer get a nuclear weapon. We'd like to get us out of here as soon as possible. We'd like to be on one of your ships. We feel a little vulnerable here." "I understand, Tom. We're still considering all options. Having a rogue computer and a crazy scientist with a nuclear weapon is not acceptable, and we'll have to take appropriate steps. I'm not sure if we can evac you yet. We've got to consider our fleet's security first. Once we decide what to do, we'll do everything we can to get you out of there." "Thanks, Admiral. Just don't forget us. SC out. CVN 87 out."
"Tom, this is SIMPOC talking through Alpha. I understand that you must do what is necessary. Julius and the computer have attacked me before, and I suspect that if you were gone, they would still attack me. I am the only computer that has similar capabilities. If you leave, you'll be able to seek the protection of many others. Do not let me or Alpha affect your decision. Do what is best for the remaining humans."
"SIMPOC, I understand, but no one is able to help us right now. And you have. So I think we need to stick together until the situation changes."
Tom sat for a moment, trying to come up with some options, when Sally and Bill entered. "Can we talk to you for a moment?" Sally asked. "Absolutely," said Joan. "I've been looking at the DNA of the Desert Beach crew. Each member had 2 DNA samples done before launch, one at 12 months prior, and then one just prior to launch. Then the samples are compared with another sample after return to monitor for any radiation damage. The crew that we brought back had a sample done 12 months prior, and then just prior to launch, and I have compared them with our DNA now. The DNA taken over the previous months prior to launch matches with ours right now. We had a couple of scientists who came to Desert Beach for a short period to do research, and then they came back to Earth recently. But those that launched after us spent some time on the moon, then returned and died. When we got back, I checked on them to verify what happened. When I compare their DNA from 12 months prior to launch against their DNA at launch, and finally the DNA of their remains, I found there were changes. Their DNA just prior to launch was different from their DNA 12-month sample. It isn't a minor change of only about 0.5%, and I'm not sure of the significance yet, but at least it's a clue. How do you think it was introduced? Most likely it was a subtle virus that altered our DNA. Viruses do it all the time. If it were a virus, then it would have had the same DNA marker, and with a little research, we might be able to find some way to become resistant to the virus. Why didn't they pick up on this? I suspect they were on the right path, but everything happened so quickly. Even if I'm right, it will take me a while to put all of the pieces together. They just didn't have enough time. Okay, if some virus caused this, why did it break out all over the world at the same time? It's like some kind of switch was thrown. We have found that DNA can be changed or perhaps turned on by certain external influences like magnetic fields. Perhaps some very short pulse turned the mutation on. It might have been a pulse that was too short to be noticed, but enough to flip the switch. The CDC is in Atlanta. I need to go there and see what they had and use some of the equipment. I could be there in a long day's drive. Good suggestion. Take one of the beta units with you. I'll leave tomorrow.
Date 2051.6489. Tom and Joan were doing their best to have a quiet night alone. The dinner was excellent. Everyone was fortunate that most of the refrigeration systems were still working. When SIMPOC had directed the mobile units to continue maintaining, the electrical network items like food storage benefited. After dinner, Tom and Joan were enjoying a bottle of wine and talking very little. They were just enjoying the quiet time. Then their privacy was destroyed with a gentle knock on their door. They knew that it was Alpha. He was near them at all times, and when they wanted privacy, he would stay in the area. So the gentle knock on the door was likely Alpha. "Alpha, you may come in," Joan said after passing a pained look at Tom. "Excuse me, but something significant has happened. I will connect SIMPOC." "Tom, Joan, this is a surprising and difficult event to put into our context. But I have detected 12 spaceships approaching Earth. At first I detected a strong energy pulse from a point beyond the orbit of Neptune. And when I examined the pulse, I detected the ships approaching. They entered our solar system about 4 hours ago, and now are moving within the moon's orbit, decelerating and heading towards positions along a geosynchronous orbit. For them to move that distance in that period of time,
I calculated that they were moving at greater than light speed when they entered the solar system. When they achieve orbit, it seems to me as offensive positions. Joan and Tom just sat there and stared at Alpha. Joan, Tom, I can see you through Alpha's visual receptors. Did you hear what I said? They continued sitting there. Then Joan looked at Tom and said, "The virus. They planted it. Rotten sons of bitches!" Tom mumbled as they got up and started running to the comm center. "Alpha, can you have Beta 1 tell Bill and Will to meet us there?" Acknowledged. Tom was in the lead, and he exploded into the center, throwing the door open so violently it slammed against the wall. Will, Sally, and Bill were already standing there with Beta 1 standing next to them. "What's going on?" Will asked. "Stand by. You'll hear everything," Joan said. "Computer, bring up the Admiral and get the President. Tell them that it's critical." "Stand by. They are being located." A moment later. "Yes, Tom, what's the problem? The President is here with me." "Hi, Tom. This is President Patterson." "Good evening, sir." "This is something you've got to hear," Tom said. "SIMPOC, please repeat your message." "I am sorry to tell you this, but I have detected 12 spaceships approaching Earth. Initially, I detected a strong energy pulse from a point beyond the orbit of Neptune, and when I examined the pulse, I detected ships approaching. They entered our solar system about 4 hours ago, and now are moving within the Moon's orbit, decelerating and heading towards positions along a geosynchronous orbit. For them to move that distance in that period of time, I calculate that they were moving at greater than light speed when they entered the solar system. When they reach orbit, it seems to me as offensive positions." "What the fuck?" the Admiral said. Then Tom and Joan heard yelling and heated discussion on the fleet's end. "Admiral, listen to me. There is something else." Joan almost had to yell to get his attention. "This seems a little too much of a coincidence. The human race is nearly wiped out by a powerful, fast-moving virus that we have no defense from. Then suddenly we have an extraterrestrial invasion force entering orbit above us. This happened so fast, it's almost like a virus had been here in incubation until it was turned on," said Joan. She continued. "Admiral, 6 days from breakout to wiping out the human race. There is no possible way. It was engineered. Nature can't spread a virus that fast. Admiral, Dr. Sally Thompson has gone to the CDC to check some things out. She has found some DNA mutations that occurred with a couple of astronauts that went to the Moon and spent a short time there. When they came back, they died, and it appeared that their DNA was changed prior to their launch. If she was right, then it was done by a subtle virus, and it might have been turned on by a very short magnetic pulse. She is hoping that she can use the CDC facilities and figure it out. If we're lucky, she might be able to do something about it." "Why didn't the CDC say something?" "Most likely because it happened so fast." "At least you had a little good news. Stand by, I've got to talk with the President." "Alpha, please transmit this to the Beta unit with Dr. Thompson. She needs to know about this and be prepared to get back real fast." Acknowledged. Julius was shocked too after hearing SIMPOC's transmission. 12 alien spaceships entering orbits around Earth. Obviously this requires a significant change in my plans, he thought. But a smart man must always take advantage of a changing environment. How can I use this to my advantage? They must have new technology. Maybe I can become their ally. Perhaps I can conquer them. These are all exciting possibilities. Aliens in orbit, how do I deal with them? What if they invade my planet? Did they do this to us? Maybe I should keep an eye on this Dr. Thompson. Computer, have all mobile units come here and defend me. Have them bring any weapons they can operate. Also, I want you to send some units to the CDC in Atlanta. I want to know what Dr. Thompson finds out. Acknowledged. Mr. President, it appears everything is coming together at the same time, and this virus might have been planted. Aside from that, I'm not sure what to do with this information. I trust Colonel Hurl and his wife Joan. They are both highly respected people. This computer SIMPOC is unknown. It has helped them, and it did help to coordinate a defense when they landed. Allow me to remind you that it was a defense against another rogue computer. How do we know this isn't another rogue computer playing good guy with our people there? Haggis, I have to admit, we're all sitting here and we're a little shocked. What we've heard sounds amazing, yet horrifying. What Dr. Hurl says makes sense. No one in the medical community saw this coming. The virus seemed to turn our bodies against us. Everyone that gave me advice was dumbfounded and there were no explanations. Maybe if they had more time they could have done something. The possibility that it was engineered and delivered here is plausible, only because no one has any other explanation. That computer SIMPOC is saying the right things, And its assessment of the tactical advantage of moving to geosynchronous orbit is correct, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
We've run numerous space-based attack scenarios for gaining the high ground in a space-to-Earth conflict, and the geosynchronous orbit is the place to be. The only drawback is the distance that puts a vehicle a little over 26,000 miles from the surface. Laser weapons might not be powerful enough, but it is the best place to launch other vehicles, to observe, and to fire projectile weapons or nukes at Earth. Is there any way to verify independently what this computer is saying? There are numerous optical telescopes or space radar stations, but I don't know if any are staffed. We haven't heard from any government facilities, said the Admiral. Sir, Captain Thomas said. This carrier group has supported satellite and spacecraft recoveries. We have all of the frequencies to communicate with ground and space radar and observatories, but we might be limited to whom we can transmit. The repeater satellites may not be on the right frequencies, and we don't have any line of sight. We'll try and make open-channel broadcasts and see what kind of response we get. Excellent, Captain. Jump on that one. SC, this is Admiral Hagerly. Yes, Admiral. This is Colonel Hurl. I don't know if we can believe this computer of yours. The airway was silent. Then SIMPOC said, Admiral, approximately 99.99979% of the human population has died. I have connections with all space sensors that are currently operating, and I have already defended the Oasis crew from another thinking computer. Your sensors will reach only 175 miles into space, and your defenses may be wholly inadequate when dealing with an alien invasion force. Unfortunately, you're in a position where you need all the help you can get. The Admiral ignored the comments from SIMPOC and said, I just spoke with the President, and he asked if there is any way to get independent confirmation of these craft in space. Admiral, I left Oasis on hot standby, and I can use its radios to contact all of the observatories. Their general comm channel is one of our presets, said Joan. Excellent. Please let me know if you succeed. And if you find someone that can confirm, patch them through on this freak. Admiral out. The President indicated that he wanted to speak, and the comm unit was given to him. This is President Patterson. We're all in a very unusual position. We don't know what their intentions are, but we do know they are acting very suspicious. If this virus was inflicted on us by these invaders, then we'll have to use every resource and computer we have to defend us. SIMPOC, I'm aware of the capabilities of the new organic computers, so I'm sure you're in a position to help. I'm sure all of us will gladly work with you, and perhaps together we can protect ourselves. CVN 87 out. The point was made. Admiral Hagerly grimaced and nodded. Tom wondered if SIMPOC was smiling. Joan spoke to the primary Oasis support terminal and spoke her access codes. A moment later, the terminal came to life, showing her the status of the onboard systems. She quickly changed her primary transmission frequency to preset number 42. She took a deep breath, then said, This is Joan Hurl, commander of Oasis, broadcasting on this open frequency. If any space observation stations are manned, please respond. She waited a few minutes, then repeated the message. When she was done, she sat quietly for a moment. Oasis Commander, this is the Lowell Observatory. Joan jumped to answer. Lowell Observatory, this is Joan Hurl. I was the commander of Oasis. We were forced to abandon the station as our resources ran out. We're currently at the Space Consortium. We can talk later to update each other on what's happening, but right now I need your support. Absolutely, we'll do everything we can. What do you need? I know that you've been using the telescopes for education for a long time, but I'm hoping you can confirm something in a geosynchronous orbit. We have indications that one or more craft have taken positions on that orbit, and we need to verify them visually, and give me as much information about them as possible. Stand by. I might be able to ping the orbit. We have links to a space radar array in the desert that we use to monitor space debris. If I can get a couple of good pings, we'll have a good picture of the orbit in our hemisphere. Give me 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll get back to you on this freak. Roger, do what you can. This is important. Rog. Joan and Tom grabbed some coffee and tried to appear busy. Alpha stood in the corner, listening and observing. Space Consortium. Lowell. Go ahead. I'm not sure what I'm seeing. We were a little surprised at what we saw. I hope you can explain it. Within our field of view, there are 4 large craft stabilized in orbit, and 2 more that appear to be approaching orbit. They are big suckers. Each object is about 1,500 feet long. Visually, we can't see much at this time of day because of lighting, but as the sun moves, we should be able to get detailed photographs. What the hell are we looking at? Great, Lowell. I'll tell you everything we know in a few minutes. I'll call you back. Right now I've got to pass this to some folks a lot higher up the food chain. Stand by. Joan quickly left the Oasis connection and brought up a link to the Admiral. Admiral Hagerly, this is Joan Hurl at SC. She waited a minute, then repeated the message. Joan, this is Admiral Hagerly. Go. Sir, we've contacted the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. We were lucky there is someone there. They were able to send a radar ping and verified 4 large craft in geosync orbit and 2 others moving into orbit. Admiral, they are 1,500 feet long. Lowell can't get us photos until the sun moves. Unfortunately, we're assuming that the other 6 craft are doing the same on the back side. I'll pass the open comm channel freak to you so you can hear from Lowell yourself.
Great, stand by. The airways were silent. Joan almost spoke again to make sure she hadn't lost the connection. Then Admiral Hagerly responded. This is Admiral Hagerly on Common Freak. Please respond.
This is SC, Joan said. This is Lowell Observatory. My name is Robert.
Joan, Robert, I can't say much, except I've spoken with the President and Congress. And you can consider us in a state of war. Send us photos when they come in.
Admiral, what do we do? Joan asked.
Pray.
Admiral, are you sending planes to pick us up?
Not for a while. Our deck is tied up launching high-priority craft. As soon as I can, they'll be airborne and I'll give you a call. We'll be in touch. CVN 87 out. SC out.
Lowell out.
Tom, I think we need to give Red Dirt an update, Joan said under her breath. Tom nodded, and she spoke into the comm unit. Transmit to Red Dirt. Red Dirt, this is Joan Hurl. I've got critical information. You are aware of the dire impacts of the virus. Since then, all of the personnel from Desert Beach have arrived safely. Now for the scary part. Recently, 12 very large spaceships have been detected entering orbit around Earth. They are positioning themselves in what appears to be offensive positions. We have also been in contact with Lowell Observatory in Arizona, and they have verified the craft and their positions. I spoke with Admiral Hagerly, and I pointed out that having a dormant virus suddenly turn on and wipe out the human race, followed by an alien invasion force, is too much of a coincidence to accept. Dr. Thompson, who came back from Desert Beach, has gone to the CDC to see if she can figure it out. She found some DNA mutations that might have been turned on and caused all of this. The President has said that we are at a state of war with these aliens. I know there isn't much you can do except wait and see what develops here. I wanted to give you the best information so you can make your hard decisions. You might want to stay put until we figure this out. SC out. Julius sat in the lab, with a smile on his face. We're at war, he whispered to himself. Isn't it going to be fun to live through these challenging times? There are always opportunities during chaos, he thought. Computer, how many mobile units are coming to protect me? There are 12,412 on site, and I have an additional 22,300 from the adjoining cities moving in this direction. They are bringing all weapons that they can operate. Great. Date 2051.6490. Alpha, SIMPOC, please identify any mobile units that you can get to the Space Consortium, and also any weapons. We may have to defend ourselves here, Tom said. Tom, SIMPOC is searching all of Florida. Unfortunately, there are many mobile units, but very little weaponry. We have numerous Air National Guard units with vehicles and projectile weapons, but mobile units will have limited effectiveness with those weapons. They'll be able to get the equipment here, but they aren't capable of maneuvering and firing them. We have multiple Air Force bases, but none of the mobile units are able to fly. There is also naval weaponry available, but again, the mobile units are not technically able to be effective, said Alpha. Tom, this is SIMPOC. I have a suggestion. Go ahead. We need everything we can use at this point. A large, ineffective force makes an excellent target, but small mobile units with minor weapons are a more difficult target. Anonymity may be our best defense. Excellent suggestion. That might be our best option. Let's keep the 5 pulse weapons, and we'll use them to protect ourselves if we need to. Go ahead and disperse the mobile units we have on the base, but keep them local. Acknowledged. Space Consortium, Lowell Observatory. Joan responded. Go ahead, Lowell. My name is Robert, Dr. Robert Chappell. I'm here with 3 other grad assistants, Mary Steuben, Harvey Kant, and Louis Barnes. We're here in a pretty remote area, and we were lucky to get our families up here before the virus hit. I just wanted to let you know about us. I'm sending you some information on who we are and who is here with us. The reason being, I don't like what I'm seeing. One of those craft has moved into the sunlight so we could get a picture. I suspect all 12 of them are parked by now. You can tell me what you want, but this is an alien spacecraft. I'm emailing the pictures to you. The bad news is that vehicle and the other 5 that we can see in orbit have 5 smaller vehicles being released from each of the larger craft. For your information, the smaller craft are about 200 feet long and about 50 feet in diameter. As they're discharged, they're staying close to the mothership. Likely they're waiting for some signal, and I presume we'll have visitors. Lowell, SC. I'm not sure how to say this, but they are what you think they are. I have spoken with what's left of our military and U.S. leadership, and they just told me that we are at war with whoever these beings are. We are a little suspicious about this virus. I think it might have been planted here and left in a dormant state some time ago. Then it was turned on. One of our people has gone to the CDC to figure it out. She has found clues that might explain this. Admiral Hagerly thinks that there are only 100,000 to 200,000 people left. I don't think it was accidental, and having these creatures arrive wasn't an accident either. I wish I could send help, but we are stuck here also. I can't do much right now, and if anything can be done, I'll try to get someone there. If you could continue monitoring the ships in orbit and let us know what they do. Right now, you're the only eyes this world has. USCF Pittsburgh is online. SC, go ahead. This is Admiral Hagerly. Good to talk with you, Doctor. Thanks for the help on this one, the Admiral said, apparently avoiding SIMPOC. Everything SC says is true. Now that Lowell has confirmation, we are assuming an invasion. I'm sorry to agree with SC, but we can't get you right now. We're concerned with fleet defense. Once we know what's going on, we'll try to help you guys out. Until then, use any resources available and keep us current with everything you find. Pittsburgh out. Lowell out. SC out. Date: 2051.6494. Alpha, please pass my voice through to Joan and Tom as I call Admiral Hagerly. Admiral Hagerly, this is SIMPOC. This is Admiral Hagerly. Go. After a pause. Unfortunately, I just detected another massive energy discharge from the same location in space. It is possible that another 12 vehicles are headed towards Earth. We should be able to detect them at any moment. You've got to be kidding me! Tom shouted to everyone in the room. One other thing, Admiral. I'm sending you an email picture of one of the craft taken by Lowell Observatory, and you'll notice each craft has 5 smaller craft separating. Each of those smaller vehicles is about 200 feet long and 50 feet wide. The Admiral was silent, then said, One good piece of information after another. SIMPOC, please continue providing information, said the Admiral. Yes, sir, was SIMPOC's reply. Admiral, any chance of picking us and Dr. Chappell up? Joan asked. Tom, Joan, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we'll get real busy here, and we won't be able to send airplanes to pick you up at either facility for some time. We've got to do everything we can to put together some kind of defense. I'm afraid you're on your own. If we come out of this in one piece, I'll buy the first round when we get together again. We understand, Admiral. Good luck. Dr. Chappell, please contact us on this channel if anything happens. Our prayers are with you, Admiral. And ours are with the both of you. Admiral Hagerly out. Lowell out. Tom, we've got to bring our group together and brief everyone. They deserve to know, Joan said. Okay, let's do it. Word was spread, and the transplanted Oasis and Desert Beach crews gathered pretty quickly in the large conference room. Tom and Joan walked downstairs towards the room, hand in hand. Alpha walked behind them, once again attaching images to the background data he had on humans. When they walked in the briefing room, everyone turned their eyes towards them. They knew something was up based on the look in their eyes. Joan stood for a moment, gathering her thoughts, then said, There have been some significant developments in the last few hours. A little over 4 hours ago, SIMPOC picked up an enormous energy pulse from a point in space just beyond the orbit of Neptune. While he was checking that out, he picked up 12 craft decelerating from within the moon's orbit. Those 12 crafts have taken up offensive positions in geosynchronous orbits around the Earth. That was confirmed by the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff. Everyone sat there with a blank stare. Then she continued. I'm sorry to say, but each of those craft are about 1,500 feet long, and each of them have launched 5 vehicles about 200 feet long and 50 feet wide. And to add to our problems, there has been another energy pulse detected from Neptune, so there is likely another group of craft that just entered our solar system. The Admiral and the President are fully aware of what we have found, and they have told us that we are at war with whoever these invaders are. Joan continued. There is one other thing. If we consider this virus which wiped out the human race in 6 days, and now this alien invasion force, it makes it pretty clear that the virus was engineered. It was put here, laid dormant for some time, then it was turned on. She stood for a moment, then continued. Unfortunately, the fleet is doing everything they can to defend themselves, and I suppose Earth. So they won't be sending planes for us anytime soon. Their faces all dropped, and a couple put their heads on the tables. She continued. We've been looking at the local area trying to find weapons, but Florida doesn't have a lot. We have thousands of mobile units, but they aren't very good with weapons. Besides that, if we have a large force that are poor at fighting, we might be setting us up as a prime target. But if we keep our defense small, we might be overlooked. So we'll keep the 5 pulse weapons and any individual weapons you can find. But we'll try to stay quiet and wait for the Navy. Alpha, let's take over the conference room and get the key people together and discuss how we're going to defend this place, Tom said. The crowd seemed to feel better now that they had something to do. Many of the crew are ex-military, so they took a deep breath and started getting the others organized and defensive strategies discussed and acted upon. CVN-87, SIMPOC, Admiral, I have just verified 12 additional spacecraft passing the moon. There is no reason to assume these first 2 groups of 12 will be the last. If the timing remains consistent, we may have ships arriving every 4 to 5 hours. Yes, SIMPOC, I'll tell the Admiral and President, said the duty officer. Alpha, this is SIMPOC. Please allow me to speak to Joan and Tom. Tom, Joan, I just identified another 12 space vehicles passing the moon, and following similar paths to the others. I have already told the Admiral, and I'm afraid this might be just the beginning. There may be others coming. Joan and Tom didn't have much to say. Their shoulders sagged. In the comm room, Joan spoke to the comm unit. Admiral, Dr. Chappell, SC, please respond. CVN-87 is up. Lowell is up. Gentlemen, now that SIMPOC has just confirmed another 12 ships passing the moon, Lowell, please verify when you can. Admiral, SIMPOC suggests that these might be the first waves. There is no reason to think they'll stop with these 24 ships. We're searching the immediate area for any weapons we can locate, but we don't have many people here to fight, and the mobile units that defended us are pretty much unarmed. If we were able to find many weapons here in Florida, the mobile units couldn't do much with them. So we're going to disperse our mobile units but keep them local, and we'll keep the pulse weapons and arm ourselves, then keep a low profile until you can pick us up. I agree. Let's all prepare for the worst. Pittsburgh out. We'll keep an eye on 'em. Lowell out. Red Dirt, SC. Got some bad news. Apparently another 12 spacecraft are passing the moon and entering orbit. I don't know what will happen. I don't know if we'll be here much longer. I suggest you wait it out as long as possible. I'd hate to have you come home in the middle of a space battle. Good luck. I'll transmit again when I can. SC out. Date 2051.6496. Mr. President, Admiral Hagerly. We've taken SAR TS Oplan 8263 and made some adjustments. It originally assumed that we'd be defending along with CONUS resources, so we've adjusted given our current situation. We also didn't plan on having so many refugees. Right now we have over 300 ships in our vicinity with approximately 10 to 12,000 civilians. Captain, I know we're in a desperate situation, but we have to account for the civilians. We can't abandon them, and I know they'll hinder fleet ops, the President said firmly. Yes, sir. In a typical engagement, if we were under attack from a foreign power and they had someplace to go, we wouldn't allow them within the fleet. But given the situation, we're allowing them within the fleet boundaries, but by doing so, our flank speed is the slowest vessel in the group. If we decide to launch, we'll leave many of them behind, the captain said with regret. Captain, we have to concern ourselves with fleet survival, but also civilian survival. This may end up being one of the last human settlements, the President said solemnly. Yes, sir. We've developed a circular cruise pattern. We can't hide from space, so we're circling the wagons, and we have passed our concerns and maneuvering information to the remaining fleets. If we do need to launch aircraft, we have to accelerate, but once launched, we'll circle back to defend the civilians. If we are forced into a full final defense that involves nuclear weapons, our safeguards are still in place, and no nuclear weapons will be used by our forces without proper command codes. Other navies are following their national protocols. Unfortunately, our weapons aren't well suited for this type of defense. The President asked, "What do you think will happen?" We feel that the assaults will take 2 directions. 1, because the landmass is essentially unoccupied, they will land ground forces and establish control. The second part of their plan will be to deal with the seaborne forces. We can't do much about any land invasion, but we've come up with some scenarios for sea warfare. We acknowledge that we don't know what kind of weapons they may have, nor how strong they may be. We are recommending a dispersed fleet arrangement. Until we see their attack plan, we're forced to make assumptions. If they have a broad area laser strong enough to do damage, we're in trouble, and we need to disperse as much as possible. If they have a point laser, then it won't matter if we're dispersed. We'll hold out as long as our ablative coatings last. What about the civilians? Asked the President. That will be a challenge. It is difficult for us to stay in one place and defend them, but it also is impossible for them to keep up with us. I have a suggestion, said the Admiral. Mr. President, can we proceed to the Hampton Roads area and let the civilians take up residence? Then we can stay in the area and try to have a home base and provide defense. There are numerous airfields and army posts, so we could spread out and have a larger defensive position with more resources. With those units coming in from Texas, we'll have some defensive ability. After all, we can't stay at sea forever. The civilians and the fleet will need replenishment. I guess that is a good suggestion. If we have a land base, we might be able to sustain a defense longer, and we'll be able to resupply. If you agree, I suggest we make waves towards Norfolk. If we can put together a better defense there, then we should get there as soon as possible. Until we get the civilians and some kind of port defense set up, we're more vulnerable. Haggis, I agree. Captain Thomas, could you pass our decision to the other fleets and to Space Consortium? Yes, sir. Mr. President, while we're at sea and the civilians are with us, we have to consider other options for defense. If the laser is broad, we'll direct the civilian craft to scatter. If the laser is focused and can focus on an entire ship, we'll have to maneuver as fast as possible and hopefully disrupt their aiming. If the civilians are still with us, the aliens will hit us first and the civilians might be able to get away. If we set them up in Norfolk and remain maneuvering at sea, they'll focus on us and the civilians will have more time. So once we've dropped them in Norfolk, we're on our own. What about missiles? The main part of the fleet defense will be the FEL laser cruisers and railgun frigates, which will surround the carriers. We're deploying them in 2 concentric circles with the lasers further out and the frigates closer in. The range of the 250 kilowatt FEL laser is 25 miles depending on atmospheric conditions. Unfortunately, they're designed for aircraft and missiles, not craft in orbit, particularly geosynchronous orbit. We are positioning the railgun frigates in a radial dispersion closer in around the carriers, because we don't know what the threat will be, nor its direction. When the frigates fire, we'll be hurling 3.4-pound projectiles at them at Mach 7. They aren't as effective against missiles at long range, but they can take them down as they get closer. If they attack us with airborne craft, we have some options, but if they sit in space and hammer us with lasers, our ablative deck coatings will last only a short time. The submarines' role is unknown, so we'll keep them widely scattered. If they have surface ships, the subs will be able to redirect their anti-ship missiles. In the case our surface ships are taken out of the conflict, we suggest they remain covert and elude and evade as long as possible. They may be able to do some damage at some point in the future. Gentlemen, that's what we have. Any questions? Captain Thomas concluded. President Patterson and Admiral Hagerly sat for a moment thinking about their options. Even though the military had a plan for space invasion, being the only defensive force on the planet wasn't part of the plan. Gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fleet might be just as easily protected in port as we might be at sea. I know that is against everything you believe in, but from space we can't hide. We've lost your greatest weapon, stealth. Perhaps we should set up shop in Norfolk and make our stand there. All in attendance looked at each other, and no one had a rebuttal. Captain Thomas, please put together a defensive plan for the Hampton Roads areas. Mr. President, with your permission, we'll pass what we have to the other fleets. The President sat with his chin in his hands. He looked at Captain Thomas, then Admiral Hagerly, and sat upright while saying, Gentlemen, this is a solemn day in the history of the human race and Earth. We are outnumbered, likely outgunned, and we're all that's left. We will fight with everything we have, as long as we have, and we may give everything that we have. But we will fight with pride, and the history of humanity is with us. Many forces who have faced insurmountable odds have found ways to win. How this battle ends does not reflect on our quality as a race. Pass those battle plans as necessary. Computer, have you intercepted any more communications with SIMPOC? Not since the communications with Lowell Observatory and the Navy Fleet. How many mobile units do you have to defend me? There are 4,350 on site here at Peterson Air Force Base, and another 6,208 are on the periphery of the base. There are many weapons available in the area and on this base, and the mobile units are familiarizing themselves with their operation. Because of their limitations, I'll have to interact with each of them frequently for them to maneuver or fire their weapons. They won't be very effective as a fighting force. Excellent. Remember, use every mobile unit available to protect me in this facility. If I am going to start the Empire here, I must be protected at all cost. I see. Date 2051.6498. Admiral Hagerly, Dr. Hurl, this is Lowell Observatory. Please pick up. This is an emergency. This is Admiral Hagerly. This is SC. Go ahead. We've been able to lock on to the vehicles in orbit visually, and the 5 satellite ships are moving away from the motherships. They are decelerating rapidly and will be entering the atmosphere immediately. We've been able to verify this with radar pings. Lowell, can you estimate where they'll be landing? Sorry, Admiral. They're decelerating too quickly and the variables are too numerous. Once they actually enter the atmosphere, we'll be able to narrow it down, but if they are aerodynamic, their landing footprint will be large. I wish we could give you more than that, but that's the best I can do right now. Thanks, Lowell. Good luck to all of you. Let's try to talk again in an hour and see what we have. By the way, we've decided to move to Norfolk and give the civilians some place to set up. We will set up some kind of defense there. We'll let you know when we get close. I suggest that you stay where you are until we're in port. Admiral Hagerly out. Lowell out. SC out, Joan said with an apprehensive look on her face. Tom? I love you, she said. I know. And I love you, he responded with a smile and kiss. Epilogue. I want to thank you for downloading this audiobook and listening. I don't know yet where this story will go. I have a couple of ideas and I've started an outline. I usually don't organize the story in too much detail because I tend to change it as I get into it. I've started some stories with one plan and then changed it as I got into it. If any of you have suggestions for what would be exciting and interesting for this story, let me know. I love to get input. Ray J. Perreault. This has been SIMPOC, Human Remnants. Written by Ray J. Perreault. Narrated by Zachary Johnson. Copyright 2014 by Raymond J. Perreault. Production copyright 2015 by Raymond J. Perreault.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.